The story begins with a lady known as the Stalker, whose obsession was so profound that she joined the Crown Prince's army just to follow and pester him daily. Her actions didn't stop there. They escalated to sneaking into his bedroom late at night, leading to her repeated arrests, and her behavior grew more extreme over time. Ultimately, the Crown Prince's patience with her endless harassment wore thin, and her end came when he killed her with his own hands. A modern-day girl, following the story's plot, commented that such an ending was a natural and logical consequence of the lady's actions. Just as she was lost in thought, the unexpected happened. A violent explosion erupted around her. She then awoke to the sound of a maid trying to rouse her, her vision blurry, barely able to make out the maid's figure and her strange attire, which made her wonder in confusion what she was seeing. The maid, her face full of worry, supported her and asked if she was all right, as the girl was clutching her head, looking to be in great pain. The maid tried to remind her of what had happened, explaining that the oven had exploded, and the girl checked her own face, finding some minor scratches and wounds from the accident. She looked around at the luxurious and unfamiliar surroundings, feeling completely lost and wondering where she was. Then, she realized a shocking truth. She had entered the world of the novel she was reading and had been reincarnated as the villainess, Lady Seraphie de Brinius. As the maids bathed her, a sense of despair washed over her as she contemplated her new fate, knowing that the character whose body she now occupied was destined to die in the prime of her youth. One of the maids noted her lack of clothing and was wondering what to do, while Seraphie sat on the bed in a simple nightgown. The maid told her the reason was that she had been so busy stalking the Crown Prince that she didn't even have time to change her clothes, which greatly surprised the new Seraphie. To remedy this, the maid excitedly announced that she had carefully selected a batch of new dresses, but Seraphie showed her annoyance and tried to stop her. The maid proudly displayed some provocatively styled dresses, claiming they were her lady's usual favorite style. She then asked Seraphie to choose the prettiest one from the selection, but Seraphie, clearly displeased with the choices, turned her face away. The maid was surprised by her reaction and reminded her that she used to refuse to wear any other style of clothing, and that her current clothes were too worn out to be worn. Seraphie, determined to break away from the character's past, told the maid from behind a curtain to throw all those dresses away and announced that she was going to change. The maid stood frozen, staring at the dresses in surprise, unable to comprehend her lady's sudden change in taste and this strange command. Soon, her confusion vanished, replaced by a radiant smile filled with joy and relief, as she realized the young lady had finally come to her senses. Just as the maid was basking in her happiness, Seraphie peeked out from behind the curtain again, telling her there was something else that needed to be prepared, which piqued the maid's curiosity once more. Meanwhile, soldiers in the hall were spreading news of the accident, seemingly that Lady Seraphie had caused an oven to explode, destroying all the prepared meals. They worriedly asked each other if they would be deprived of their meals for the day, anticipating that this incident was just a new chapter in her series of reckless, stalker-related acts. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Seraphie, who walked past them with a confident stride, dressed in an elegant military uniform, leaving them in a state of utter shock. One of them stared blankly at the scene, finding it unbelievable. Unconcerned by their stunned gazes, she continued on her way, leaving them in disarray and confusion, her destination a large, official-looking building. Standing before the Crown Prince's office, she recalled the details of the original story, how Seraphie had obsessively pursued Crown Prince Raven, and her tragic fate of being killed by him at the age of 18. This dark destiny prompted her to ask her maid, Emily, her current age, which surprised the maid, who thought her lady had lost her memory either from extreme happiness or the shock of the accident. Emily reminded her how happy she had been when she turned 15 and assured her that this was indeed her current age. Seraphie realized she had only 3 years left before facing her fate, and with a determined look in her eyes, she resolved that she had to change her destiny before it was too late. Inside the Crown Prince's office, a soldier was presenting a report on Lady Seraphie, explaining that she had fainted from an oven explosion while trying to cook. The Crown Prince expressed surprise at the news of an oven explosion and asked about the safety of others, to which the soldier replied that the young lady was the only one injured. Relieved that no one else was hurt, the Crown Prince coldly returned to his documents, completely unconcerned about Seraphie's condition. His aide, clearly perplexed, couldn't understand the Crown Prince's calm reaction. The Crown Prince noticed his aide's confusion, reminded him that he must get used to such things, and mentioned the destined army. Then, the Crown Prince asked his aide if he had ever met Lady Seraphie before. The aide gave a negative response. At this, the Crown Prince suggested it would be best if he never met her, sternly warning him not to get involved with her in any way and ordering him to avoid her if he saw her. The aide expressed his understanding, remaining silent and obedient. The Crown Prince continued his warning, explaining that he would inevitably recognize her, even from a distance, because she exuded a strange and annoying aura. He recalled with disgust and a chill a previous situation where she had always forced him to eat the cinnamon cake she prepared, but without any cinnamon. The Crown Prince showed extreme irritation, asserting that the woman was exhausting just by being in his sight, and once again instructed his aide to avoid her as much as possible. Ironically, just as he finished speaking, Seraphie's voice was heard from behind the door, requesting entry, which made the Crown Prince lament his aide's bad luck. Despite his resentment, the Crown Prince allowed her to enter, and Seraphie pushed the door open and walked calmly into the office. The Crown Prince looked at his aide with a mocking gaze, asking if he was ready to face the monster, to which the aide firmly replied that as the vice commander, he would overcome any ordeal. Pleased with his aide's resolve, the Crown Prince then offered to introduce her to him. Just as the aide braced himself, the Crown Prince continued his sarcastic introduction, describing Seraphie as the most terrifying monster in this world. Seraphie, standing before them in a crisp and elegant military uniform, calmly and respectfully saluted the Crown Prince. The expressions of both the Crown Prince and his aide froze in utter shock, as her appearance and polite demeanor were the complete opposite of the image the Crown Prince had just painted in their minds. Seraphie continued with a gentle smile, explaining that she was here to escort him to the dining hall. The Crown Prince was completely stunned, wondering what was happening, so she simply told him that dinner was ready. The Crown Prince's destined army faced a fundamental problem, a lack of skilled cooks. Because all the soldiers were only proficient in combat, every time they tried to prepare a meal, the result was disastrous. The cooking scene was chaotic. Someone chopped the cutting board along with the vegetables. Another cracked an egg on a comrade's head. Someone even used a flamethrower instead of a gas stove to light a fire. The inevitable result was plates of twisted, burnt food that no living creature could possibly swallow. Flashing back to the kitchen a short while ago, the maid Emily was watching her lady, Seraphie, skillfully chop carrots, expressing her amazement at her culinary prowess. Seraphie thought to herself that since the soldiers were picky about food, blowing up the kitchen to escape would land her in big trouble. Fortunately, her hobby and specialty was cooking, and after tasting the food she had prepared, a satisfied smile appeared on her face because it was delicious. She hoped that this food would improve their bad impression of her, and perhaps even earn her some recognition from the Crown Prince. But in the dining hall, when Seraphie served a bowl of delicious soup, the Crown Prince looked at the food with suspicion, thinking that her insidious methods had evolved and this was just a new trap of hers. The Crown Prince, furious, looked at her with contempt, thinking she was still as foolish as before, trying to force him to eat her vulgar food again. His mention of again confused Seraphie, who didn't understand what he meant. Sitting before the despised food, he asked her in a threatening tone what she was planning this time, accusing her of yet another new scheme. Seraphie suddenly picked up a piece of food that had fallen on the table and ate it herself, leaving the Crown Prince and his aide completely stunned. She calmly told him that she didn't know what misunderstanding he was talking about and asserted that it was just ordinary food prepared with fresh ingredients. She then added that it was fine if he refused to eat it, but she pleaded with him not to throw it away, which seemed to confuse the Crown Prince slightly. The Crown Prince stood up from his seat, his eyes still filled with suspicion, declaring that he could see she was up to something again. He then turned to leave, challenging her to try and deceive him if she could, but asserting that he would not fall into her trap. Seraphie remained where she was, while the vice commander observed silently from the side. Driven by curiosity or duty, the vice commander took a piece of the food, intending to try it himself later. On the carriage ride back, the maid Emily informed her that they had arrived at the palace. As soon as Seraphie stepped out of the carriage, she was struck by the magnificent grandeur of the palace before her. She walked up the steps, marveling at the greatness of the building, which was truly befitting of the Empire's most powerful family. When she entered her room, she found it to be exceptionally luxurious and sparkling, making her wonder if this was really her room, while the maid went to prepare her bath. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling a bit agitated. She guessed it might be a jewelry box. She pulled out the wooden box and opened it. A look of confusion appeared on her face as soon as she saw the strange contents inside. Emily returned to tell her the bath was ready and found her lady sitting on the floor next to the open box. The maid asked with concern what had happened. Seraphie looked at a lock of pink hair in the box and, feigning a hazy memory, asked Emily if she knew what it was. Emily hesitantly replied that the hair belonged to a noble lady whom Seraphie had intensely hated. Seraphie tried to recall the details of the novel, but didn't remember this part, so she guessed it might be an unmentioned side event and wondered why the original owner hated that lady. Emily confirmed her suspicions, explaining that the reason was that the lady had tried to seduce the crown prince, which made Seraphie think about how absurd the situation was, giving her a headache. Then, Seraphie realized the reason for Raven's extreme shock at her polite behavior. No wonder he had been expecting the worst from her. Seraphie decided to find an opportunity to apologize to the lady, a decision that deeply surprised Emily. Emily told her the shocking news. The lady was already dead. This made Seraphie freeze in place, asking her to repeat what she had just said. She wondered in horror what had happened, and a terrible thought crossed her mind. Could the original Seraphie have killed her? Emily assured her that the point wasn't who did it or what happened. The lady's infamy was known throughout the kingdom, which made Seraphie wonder if there was another character with a reputation as bad as her own. Emily explained that the lady was known for her outrageous behavior. She had put an aphrodisiac in the crown prince's food and snuck into his bedroom that night, but was caught and shamefully thrown out. The maid told her lady that she had been furious when that happened, insisting that the lady's actions were a crime, and had even gone to great lengths to stop Seraphie from killing her. Just as Seraphie was confusedly wondering if she was the one who had snuck into the bedroom and not the lady, the maid continued, explaining that the lady, resentful of being rejected, had committed suicide by taking poison right in front of the crown prince, asserting that her level of madness was on a completely different scale. Seraphie realized the events were fundamentally different. The Seraphie character in the novel had stalking tendencies, but she wouldn't commit such heinous acts as drugging food or committing suicide in front of the crown prince. Confusion enveloped her as she wondered what on earth had happened and how the story she knew had changed. In the crown prince's office, his aide informed him that the meal Seraphie had presented yesterday had won unanimous praise, and therefore she would be in charge of preparing the meal from now on. The crown prince, looking coolly at his documents, ordered his aide to tell her to do as she pleased. But then he corrected himself, adding a condition to his approval. In the kitchen, Seraphie felt optimistic, believing that the story's content might now change, and she might even avoid her fated death. So she resolved to do her absolute best. She asked her maid, Emily, to taste the food she had prepared, and Emily excitedly agreed. Emily marveled at how delicious the food was, asserting that everyone would love it, while Seraphie secretly hoped it would also win the crown prince's approval. Her only wish was for the crown prince to eat her meal that day. Her dream was interrupted by the arrival of the vice commander, who relayed the crown prince's message that she had been permitted to take charge of the meals. But he added a shocking exception. As long as she was in the kitchen, the crown prince would eat nothing. Seraphie was shocked, wondering if the crown prince intended to go on a hunger strike. She realized that due to her past stalking behavior, her relationship with the crown prince had hit a dead end, and any attempt at an apology now would not work. She thought to herself that if ordinary methods couldn't move his heart, she had to do something with a strong impact to show him the extent of her desperation and desire to change. She told the vice commander that she understood, and since that was the case, she would also go on a hunger strike. The vice commander looked at her in complete confusion, unable to comprehend her decision. She announced with a smile that she couldn't just sit by and watch the crown prince suffer. Later, she trembled with fear, realizing she might starve to death before the crown prince even considered eating. Days passed, and Seraphie followed the crown prince as he trained, wondering how he could continue like this without food. The hunger began to affect her, and she felt a headache and dizziness, so she decided to find a quiet place to rest. Suddenly, she lost her balance and felt herself about to fall. But before she could fall, a strong hand caught her, and she found herself in the crown prince's arms, stammering her thanks to him. She looked at him in shock, wondering how he had suddenly appeared when he had been somewhere else just a second ago. The crown prince sternly asked what she was doing in a restricted area. She apologized to him, explaining that she felt a headache and dizziness. The crown prince looked at her with contempt, called her a fool, and then grabbed her shoulders to warn her not to misunderstand the situation. He coldly told her that no matter what she did, he would never open his heart to her. Then, he whispered a piercing word in her ear, calling her a murderer. Seraphie was visibly startled, wondering to herself if she was really a murderer, realizing there was something she didn't know about this character's past. The crown prince continued his hostile remarks, condemning her new tone of voice and unfamiliar attire. As she puzzled over the meaning of his words murderer, the crown prince accused her of faking her composure, but she inwardly resolved to remain calm, focus on the present situation, and postpone investigating the unknown matters until later. He angrily demanded that she stop this ridiculous act and revert to the natural state he was familiar with. With complete composure, she apologized to him for everything that had happened in the past. Her apology stunned the crown prince, as he hadn't expected this kind of reaction from her. Then, she promised him that she would never pester His Highness again. He looked at her with mockery and skepticism, wondering how he was supposed to believe her. So she pointed out that she hadn't approached him for the past few days and assured him that this would continue. Please don't worry. Based on this, she suggested he have a meal now, but realizing her attempt might not work, she explained to him that hunger strikes are used as a means of protest because food is directly related to health. She warned him that he might feel fine now, but if he continued like this, he would soon fall ill. At that very moment, extreme weakness washed over her, and she began to sway, whispering a plea for some food, and the crown prince rushed over to catch her, preventing her from falling. After that incident, she succeeded in persuading the crown prince to eat, and, as he ate, an expression of unexpected surprise appeared on his face. The crown prince commented that it seemed the food wasn't so bad that it was inedible, and Seraphie thanked him gratefully. Later in her room, the word murderer reoccupied her thoughts, and she seriously wondered if she had really killed someone. Anxiety prompted her to ask her maid, Emily, if she had ever committed any crimes. She further clarified her question, wondering if she had ever killed someone. Emily burst out laughing, asserting that it was impossible and that her lady was not the type of person to do such a thing. Surprised by her quick and decisive denial, Seraphie prompted Emily to explain since she couldn't remember. Emily reminded her that despite her hatred for insects, she always felt bad about killing them and would always order her to release them instead of harming them. She added that the task of catching and releasing insects was more difficult than simply killing them, and Seraphie seemed to understand. She apologized to Emily for the past trouble, saying she could do as she pleased from now on, but Emily explained that wasn't what she meant. Emily concluded with absolute certainty that her lady could never be a bad person who would harm any living creature. Seraphie thanked the maid for her words, and the maid replied that she had done nothing to deserve thanks. Afterwards, the maid decided to go prepare ingredients, while Seraphie wanted to look around, so she put on a hooded robe and went out for a patrol. She witnessed a scene where a nobleman was bullying a commoner child, telling him he was just a commoner and didn't need a doll. The nobleman continued to taunt that the fate of commoners from birth to death was to be worker ants. The child pleaded with the man to return his toy, but the nobleman scoffed at it as a piece of rag and threatened to set it on fire. Seraphie interrupted the scene with a firm command, demanding the man to stop, which drew his attention to her, wondering about her identity. She suggested that he calmly return the toy to the child, but he responded to her request with a strained smile, asking if the child really needed the toy, then contemptuously threw it on the ground and ordered the child to pick it up. Her arrogance infuriated the nobleman, who wondered about her identity to dare be so insolent. But when she removed her hood, the nobleman's expression turned to one of shock as he recognized her silver hair and purple eyes. He recognized her immediately, wondering in shock if she was the Duchess Brinius. Seraphie, in an unquestionable tone, ordered him to apologize to the child and return the toy immediately. Her command sparked his resentment. He angrily wondered how she could order him to do such a thing when he was also a noble like her. She responded with a rhetorical question. Had his family not taught him that nobles should not bully others without reason? Feeling deeply insulted and realizing this arrogant girl was making him lose face, he turned to leave. As he left, he resentfully threw the toy at the child, warning him that he was lucky and to be more careful in the future. Seraphie called out to him again, telling him that if he had any objections to the child, he could visit the Brinia Palace anytime, which made him quicken his pace to flee. Seraphie turned to the child and comforted him, telling him that if he was ever bullied again, he could always come to her, and the child happily agreed. The crown prince and his aide observed the scene from distance. Seraphie saw them and noticed they seemed to be in a hurry, while she wanted to ask them if the food was delicious. She approached them and asked Vice Commander Damien if something had happened. Damien told her that a foreign tribe in the north seemed to be causing trouble recently, and he would be heading there in a few days for subjugation. Seraphie expressed concern that the mission was in just a few days, thinking it was a bad thing, but Damien reassured her that it was nothing major, that this situation had happened repeatedly before, and all they had to do was intervene to solve the problem. She offered to prepare a large amount of non-perishable jerky for them if they were going to battle, and Damien understood that she was worried about his meals. Just then, an old man named Uncle Bart appeared, asking Seraphie if she was going with them too. Bart explained to her that the mission would be tough because it was in a primeval forest, but Seraphie wondered who would prepare the food if she didn't go. Bart laughed, saying that her going with them would be a great help. Seraphie asked how long they planned to stay, as they needed to prepare ingredients in advance. He replied that His Highness would also be going, so he didn't think it would take too long, and then directly asked the Crown Prince how long the trip would take. The Crown Prince suddenly appeared, replying that it would take about a week. Seraphie was surprised by his sudden appearance, while Bart welcomed the Crown Prince's participation, thinking it would speed up the end of the mission. Bart asked Seraphie if she heard the duration, and she gave an affirmative answer. He then asked her what she planned to do, and she told him she intended to prepare jerky, but she had heard from a shop that there was a magic to prevent food from spoiling, and she needed to learn some magic. Bart told her that some ingredients sold already came with magic attached, but they were expensive, which frustrated her. Seraphie thought to herself that this was her first time going to a battlefield, and she had never imagined she would encounter such a thing, which made her feel desperate, repeatedly muttering that this couldn't be happening. As they walked through the forest, Seraphie was panting with exhaustion, wondering to herself how this could be happening, yet it was indeed happening. She looked at the soldiers who were walking with ease, wondering how everyone could be fine in this situation. Amazement washed over her as she wondered if these people were even human to be able to endure this kind of exertion. She turned to Damien and hesitantly asked if they could move directly to their destination, reminding him that they had already moved to the forest entrance. Damien explained to her that mass teleportation was difficult in a forest where magical power was mixed and unstable. Seraphie understood this, so Damien offered to arrange for her to leave the forest and inform the Crown Prince if she was struggling, but she refused and asserted that she would be fine. Damien noticed she was barely holding on and told the Crown Prince, who wondered if it was appropriate to just leave her behind while she was struggling to follow. The Crown Prince reprimanded Damien for his sudden excessive concern for a specific individual. Damien immediately apologized. The Crown Prince ordered him to stop worrying about her and focus only on the march. The Crown Prince watched Seraphie from a distance, seeing her sit down to rest for a moment before getting up to continue on her way. Seraphie was encouraging herself not to rely on others, reminding herself that she was no longer the old Seraphie who did as she pleased, but a mature and responsible person now. She was determined that she could do it too, when suddenly she tripped. She was tripped by something, and looking down, she found a strange vine wrapped around her leg. Before she could realize what was happening, she felt a sharp pain in her shoulder. The vine gripped her leg and began to pull her away from the path. She cried out for help as she fell and was subsequently swept away from the group. She fell in an unfamiliar place deep in the forest, panting from fear and exhaustion, not knowing where she was. A child with pointed ears appeared before her, so she asked who he was. The child noticed she was different from other humans. He explained to her that it was strange because he could hear the thoughts of ordinary humans, but he couldn't hear any of hers. Seraphie shocked, asked if he could read minds, and he confirmed it to her. Back at the camp, the soldiers were wondering if they should set up camp here for the night, and one of them replied that the scouting team had not yet returned. The Crown Prince noticed Seraphie was missing and wondered where she had gone. Damien asked where the Crown Prince was going, and the Crown Prince told him not to tell anyone that he was going to look for Seraphie himself. Meanwhile, Seraphie asked the child about her location and why he had brought her here. He replied that he knew why the humans had come and asked her directly if their goal was to kill them. Seraphie was shocked, realizing that this child belonged to the demi-human race that had been kidnapping humans. The elf child angrily denied her accusation, insisting that as elves, they would not do such a thing. The child realized there seemed to be a serious misunderstanding, so Seraphie reassured him that it was okay, as the Crown Prince would never harm innocent people. The child questioned her words, pointing out that he could sense the presence of a large number of human weapons nearby. Seraphie explained to him that they had come here because they heard there were demi-humans in this area harming people. The child understood the situation, and, since elves don't attack humans, he concluded that Seraphie wouldn't harm him either, so she assured him she definitely wouldn't and told him not to worry. The child told her that she was incapable of lying, which confused her. He explained that even though he couldn't hear her thoughts, he could discern her feelings and perceive Seraphie. Seraphie wondered to herself about the meaning of the word perceive. The child replied that humans who lie give off the scent of a lie, leading Seraphie to suspect if it was some kind of animal instinct. Suddenly, the child sensed something and told her to hide. Two strange creatures with horns appeared, and one of them said she smelled a human. The elf child stepped out to confront them, ordering them to leave as this was not their territory. The two creatures mocked him, describing him as weak and incomplete. The female, one among them, spotted Seraphie hiding behind the child and said she had found her. Seraphie realized that these were the real demi-humans. She told the child that the situation was dangerous and they had to run. Then she held him to try and protect him, but one of the creatures attacked them with a weapon. At the last moment, the Crown Prince appeared and deflected the attack, once again scolding Seraphie for her recklessness. The Crown Prince looked at the creatures that had attacked them. With a single swing of his sword, he dispatched all the monsters. Seraphie watched him in shock as the Crown Prince asked her why she was here, also wondering about the identity of those creatures. The Crown Prince pointed his sword at the elf child, asking if he was the one who brought Seraphie here. Seraphie quickly intervened, explaining that a vine had dragged her away and that the child was the one who saved her. The child whispered to Seraphie that he didn't like that man because his thoughts were too loud. She smiled and reassured him that he was a good person. The Crown Prince watched their interaction, his face showing displeasure. The Crown Prince decided it was time to return to the troops. Suddenly, Seraphie felt a pain in her shoulder, and the Crown Prince asked with concern if she was hurt. He noticed her shoulder was swollen and asked her what had happened. Seraphie tried to downplay the injury, remembering what the Crown Prince had done to her and realizing he was the one who caused it. So he asked if the creatures had caused her injury, but she told the Crown Prince that the injury wasn't caused by them, that she was perfectly fine, and that the Crown Prince had saved her before they could attack her. The Crown Prince grabbed the elf child by his clothes, suspecting he was the one who hurt Seraphie. Seraphie immediately denied it and asked him to put the child down. The child, in turn, shouted, demanding the Crown Prince let him go, and introduced himself as Zephyr. The Crown Prince held Zephyr aside and demanded that Seraphie tell him who had caused her injury. Seraphie claimed she injured herself while exercising, but the Crown Prince didn't believe her, pointing out that he had never seen her exercise. He reminded her that although she always nagged him about staying healthy, he had lost count of the number of times he had seen her take a nap right after a meal, which surprised her, making her wonder when he had seen that. Seraphie felt conflicted. She wanted to be honest, but didn't want to make the atmosphere awkward. The Crown Prince warned her that his patience was limited and ordered her to tell the truth immediately. Under the influence of his words, which were like a spell, Seraphie confessed that it was the Crown Prince himself who had hurt her when he grabbed her shoulder and pushed her against a wall. Seraphie realized he had used the dragon's tongue to force the truth out of her, thinking it was unfair. The Crown Prince was shocked and regretful about what he had done, but but he assured her that once they returned to the palace, he would make sure she received proper treatment, asserting that a shoulder injury was not something to be taken lightly. Seraphie tried to comfort him, saying she was fine and that the wound would heal quickly if a doctor or a priest examined it. The crown prince reluctantly agreed, but asked her to tell him immediately if the pain worsened. Seraphie thanked him for his concern. Their conversation was interrupted by Zephyr, who was still being held by the crown prince, demanding to be put down. The crown prince abruptly put him on the ground. Zephyr ran to Seraphie and hugged her. This provoked the crown prince's jealousy, and he looked extremely displeased with the child. Zephyr whispered to Seraphie that elves possess healing abilities. Zephyr told Seraphie that her shoulder looked painful and offered to heal it for her, but the crown prince quickly intervened, pushing away Zephyr's hand as it reached for Seraphie and ordering him not to touch her. Zephyr yelled at the crown prince, explaining that he was just trying to heal the spot that was injured because of the crown prince himself, and that if he truly felt guilty, he shouldn't interfere. Zephyr told Seraphie that the healing might be a little itchy, and asked her to bear with it. Zephyr placed his hand on Seraphie's shoulder and began to use his healing magic, but he was surprised to find that the magic didn't work, even though he was sure it had reached her. Seraphie reassured him, saying that she had a constitution that made it difficult for magic to work on her, but she also wondered to herself why it didn't work, as she remembered the novel mentioning that elven magic was very effective for healing. The crown prince interrupted the situation, telling Seraphie to leave the child alone as they would be heading back soon. Zephyr refused to let them leave. Seraphie asked why, and Zephyr replied that there was something both of them should know. Zephyr revealed his true identity, announcing that he was the leader of the demi-humans in this forest. Zephyr's announcement that he was the leader of the demi-humans shocked both Seraphie and the crown prince. Zephyr explained that he had not yet completed his coming-of-age ceremony, and therefore, no one listened to him. He went on to say that the reason for the current demi-human rampage and the reason humans had come to this forest were all due to this problem, the problem of his failure to complete his coming-of-age ceremony. Zephyr pleaded with Seraphie to help him complete this ceremony, asserting that if she did, then this forest and its people would no longer have to be harmed. But the crown prince refused. He explained that, as an unwritten rule, they do not interfere in the affairs of other races, nor do they encroach upon their lands. But Seraphie ignored him and asked Zephyr how to complete this ceremony. Zephyr replied that to become an adult, he needed to be acknowledged by the elf god, but the god did not acknowledge him. Seraphie asked for the reason. Zephyr replied sadly that he believed the reason was that he was an incomplete elf. He revealed that he was a mix of half-elf and half another race, and that people called him a half-breed, but he added that there was a way to solve it. The solution was that if he got married, the god might finally acknowledge him as an adult. This idea surprised Seraphie, while Zephyr innocently asked Seraphie to marry him. The crown prince froze on the spot in utter shock. Zephyr explained that if he didn't become an adult, this forest would forever be in danger, and everyone would continue to get hurt because of him. Seraphie seemed to feel sympathy for him, but the crown prince firmly intervened, declaring that he would never allow that. Seraphie tried to persuade him, saying that the matter was unfortunate and that Zephyr was very pure and kind. The crown prince angrily asked her if she really intended to marry him just out of pity. He added that, besides, he was someone she had just met, and a child at that. Seraphie hugged Zephyr and said he was a poor little thing. The crown prince tried to persuade her that it wasn't a good idea to trust him just because he seemed pitiful. He then grabbed Zephyr and asked for his age, threatening to force him to answer. Zephyr calmly replied that his age was 227, which greatly surprised Seraphie. Zephyr tried to defend himself, explaining that the average lifespan of an elf is several thousand years and the standards are different from humans. So he was still a young child, asking them not to misunderstand. He then turned to Seraphie, pleading with her not to hate him, as he didn't mean to deceive her. But the crown prince pushed him to the ground. The crown prince sarcastically asked Seraphie if she still wanted to marry this 227-year-old geezer. His description ignited Zephyr's anger, and he shouted, demanding not to be called a geezer. Seraphie intervened and asked both of them to calm down. She then spoke to the crown prince, reminding him that their purpose for coming here was to suppress the rampaging demi-humans. She went on to say that she wondered if there was a way to resolve this peacefully without fighting and bloodshed. She added that in this situation, they had no reason to ignore the problem, and if they could help, there was no reason not to cooperate. She suggested to the crown prince that they first go and meet the elf god, and perhaps they could persuade him. After a brief thought, the crown prince reluctantly agreed to meet this so-called god, but he warned Zephyr that if he ever brought up a ridiculous topic like marriage again, he would immediately destroy this forest, and he should be prepared for it. Meanwhile, Zephyr observed the way the crown prince spoke to Seraphie, commenting that the crown prince was an unpleasant person and that his feelings for Seraphie were twisted. Zephyr wished the crown prince would be more honest about his feelings. Zephyr led them through the forest. They finally arrived at the elven village, which was a beautiful and dazzling place, but Seraphie noticed that everyone was avoiding them. She wondered if it was because they weren't used to humans. The crown prince explained to her that they were afraid of humans. Seraphie asked him why, and the crown prince told her that a long time ago, humans had carried out a great massacre against the demi-humans. At first, it was a legitimate battle against aggressive demi-humans, but over time, things changed. The war they waged to repel the aggressors gradually lost its original purpose, and in the end, they began to attack indiscriminately. Before they knew it, hunting demi-humans had become a form of entertainment for humans. They would capture them for their unique appearances, sell them, force them to work until death, and show them off as trophies. The crown prince added that it was an old story and that the law now forbids it, but he went on to say that wealthy nobles still secretly buy and sell demi-humans in the shadows. Seraphie realized that this was why Raven in the novel despised nobles. Seraphie approached a hiding elf and calmly introduced herself. Zephyr whispered to the elf that Seraphie was a kind-hearted person, and although the crown prince was another matter, she was a very good person. Seraphie felt a bit awkward, as she didn't want to be the center of attention. They followed Zephyr into one of the buildings and climbed a long staircase. An elf approached her and hesitantly asked if Seraphie was human, so she assured her that she was human and not scary. Children began to gather around, complimenting her pleasant scent and silver hair, with one even wanting to braid it. Seraphie asked the children if they liked cookies, but they didn't know what they were. She took out a box full of cookies for them, explaining that it was a sweet and delicious snack, and asked them to try some. The children tried the cookies and loved them, exclaiming how sweet and tasty they were. The crown prince watched this scene from a distance in surprise. Some of the adult elves noticed that Seraphie had a pure and clear aura and that she was very kind to the children. More children gathered around her, complimenting her shiny hair. They praised the beauty and softness of her hair. She herself also commented on the beauty of her hair. The village chief came forward to welcome Seraphie and asked about her identity. Seraphie respectfully introduced herself as Seraphie de Brinius. The village chief told her that her aura was indeed clear and calm, and that she possessed a flow of energy that was difficult for humans to perceive. Seraphie gently thanked him for his words. The village chief asked if she wished to see the elf god. Seraphie confirmed her strong desire to help. The village chief explained that the elf god resides in the core of this forest, in a rift in the world where pure energy gathers. He added that for non-elven beings, only someone who embodies primordial beauty could open that door. The term primordial beauty confused the crown prince, but Zephyr seemed confident that Seraphie would be fine, as she was pure, unlike a certain someone. The village chief told Seraphie that they must first perform a purification ritual to open the gate of the elves, and asked if she was prepared. Seraphie immediately agreed. The village chief turned to the crown prince to ask for his opinion. The crown prince replied that he didn't know what these rituals involved, but he didn't need it, and asked them to perform it only for her. The village chief understood and asked everyone to proceed to the altar. Everyone stood before the altar. The village chief placed his hand on a glowing blue stone. He ordered Seraphie to close her eyes and face the darkness within her. In the darkness of her heart, she heard familiar voices accusing her of being indifferent and cold, saying that she would only ever say yes in any situation. The voices questioned if she had ever truly loved and what made her different from the people outside. In fact, they didn't even believe she possessed feelings. She opened her eyes to find herself in tears, thinking that those memories were supposed to have faded. Seraphie wondered to herself why people still get hurt even when she had done nothing wrong, insisting that she didn't want to hurt anyone. She resolved that no one had the right to hurt her just because they were different from each other. At that moment, the gate opened before her with a brilliant light, surprising the village chief and everyone else. A creature with long white hair and an elf-like appearance emerged from the gate. The crown prince suspected this was the elf god and noticed that his aura was weaker than he had imagined. Zephyr noticed that the crown prince could see the elf god even without undergoing the ritual and asked about his true identity. The crown prince told him to remain ignorant, as he would be shocked if he found out the truth. The elf god spoke to Seraphie, calling her the human who hides primordial beauty within her heart, and asked what she wished to convey to him. Seraphie asked him to grant his acknowledgement to the leader who rules the races of this forest so that he could fulfill his duties. The elf god replied to her that there is a time for everything, and once he is ready, Zephyr will naturally be accepted as the leader even without his acknowledgement. He explained that this was a trial he must endure, and it was not something someone else could do for him. Seraphie acknowledged that his words were right, but Zephyr interrupted, insisting that if they got married, the god would have to acknowledge him as an adult and that he had already brought a bride. Zephyr tried to persuade the god, saying that Seraphie was very kind, had a beautiful heart, and that she always hugged him, which made her an ideal candidate for a bride. He also reminded her that she was the one who told him he was cute, which embarrassed her, and she reluctantly admitted it. He then asked her to kiss him, as a kiss was necessary to complete the marriage. The crown prince grabbed Zephyr, angrily pushed him away from her, and gave him a final warning, ordering him to stay put. Seraphie intervened in the situation, pointing out to the elf god that his words sounded a bit strange. The elf god asked her why they were strange. Seraphie told him that his words sounded selfish. Her words surprised both the crown prince and the village chief. Seraphie confronted him, saying that he was the one who appointed him as the leader, yet he wouldn't allow him to have his coming-of-age ceremony, and the chaos in the forest stemmed from this contradiction. She went on to say that because he couldn't become an adult, he couldn't be the leader, and because of that, the leaderless races lost control, causing many to be injured and shed blood. She asked him if, as a god who protects nature, he thought it was right to let this situation continue. The elf god answered her that there is no growth without pain, that the child was currently honing his capacity, and that others were simply waiting for that moment. The crown prince put Zephyr on the ground and declared that he had no time for such meaningless logic. Zephyr said he agreed with him, which surprised everyone. The crown prince commented that this was the first time they had reached a consensus. He then turned to the elf god and challenged him, asking if he was a self-proclaimed elf god and telling him to do as he pleased, whether it was testing his capacity or breaking it, but not to make a fuss in a quiet corner of the forest. He then declared that he was the crown prince of this empire and ordered the god not to play the role of an irresponsible bystander in front of him. He threatened that if he did not immediately acknowledge Zephyr as the leader, he would overthrow him and install a new god of his own creation in his place. The elf god explained that he was a being equivalent to nature itself and arrogantly condemned a mere human for daring to oppose him, calling his actions absolute arrogance. The crown prince sarcastically replied that if the god claimed to be nature, then they should challenge to see which of them was closer to nature. Suddenly, a powerful black aura emanated from the crown prince, transforming into a giant black dragon. The sight stunned everyone. The elf god felt fear, realizing that this was a power that not even the spirit of the earth could withstand. The crown prince threatened that he would continue, but he would only listen to his lecture after he knelt. Under immense pressure, the elf god knelt in pain and announced his agreement to the coming-of-age ceremony. He ordered those present to prepare for the ceremony, announcing that he would bless the child, which surprised the village chief and Zephyr. With the matter settled, the god turned to leave, declaring that this should be enough. The crown prince felt exhausted after using his power, so Seraphie asked with concern if he was all right. He angrily ordered her not to come near him. Seraphie looked at him with concern, while the crown prince saw an overlapping image of her surrounded by a dark aura. The crown prince, in a berserk state, yelled at her to get away, and unleashed a huge force at her, screaming not to come near him. Everyone watched in shock. Seraphie fell to the ground, unconscious. The crown prince watched what he had done in shock and horror. Zephyr rushed to her, trying to wake her up. Seraphie woke up to find herself in a strange place, surrounded by blooming blue roses, and saw Zephyr by her side. Zephyr assured her it was him, and asked if she was all right. She wondered what had happened, as she remembered going to seek the elf god's acknowledgement, and Zephyr told her that Crown Prince Raven had suddenly gone berserk and pushed her, causing her to fall. Seraphie recalled the events and realized that what happened was his fault. She asked Zephyr if the elf god had finally acknowledged him. Seraphie congratulated him on it, but Zephyr seemed confused. He stammered that it wasn't important. Before leaving, Zephyr told her there was one thing she should know and warned her to be wary of Raven, saying that being around him made him feel like he was going crazy and that he was like a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. He asked her not to forget what he had just said. Seraphie pondered his words, realizing she had no choice, thinking that years of hatred could be easily erased was a mistake. She admitted it was true, and if being by his side would cause him more pain, then perhaps it would be better to leave. As the village chief gazed at the beautiful starry sky that night, he noticed the crown prince seemed to be lost in thought. The village chief told him that when he sees the beautiful stars, he often thinks of other beautiful things. He asked the crown prince what he thought of when he looked at the stars, and the crown prince replied that it wasn't necessarily something beautiful. Things. He explained that he only thought of one person, someone who had been occupying his mind recently, which piqued the village chief's curiosity. The crown prince described this person as the worst kind of person, someone he wished to have nothing to do with. The village chief wondered if he hated this person to that extent, and the crown prince confirmed that she was indeed a hopelessly terrible person. The crown prince recalled his memories of the old Seraphie, how she lacked morals and values, was always selfish, and justified her terrible actions, calling her a truly hopeless human being. But one day, she suddenly changed completely and started caring for the weak, something she had never done before. He saw her thoughtfully preparing fresh food for the soldiers who were exhausted from intense training, and letting her maids rest. She worked every day, always thinking of others, and selflessly dedicating herself despite the difficulties, as if she had become a completely different person. At first, the crown prince thought it was all just an act, that she was trying to deceive him and win his trust to frame him, that she was plotting some kind of conspiracy. He scoffed at her actions, believing he would never be fooled. But every time he looked at her, he felt that her smile was genuine, even though he knew it could all be a lie. It still affected him deeply. At some point, he began to hope that it was all real. He confessed to the village chief that if she were to change back to how she was before, he believed he would feel even more unsettled than before he knew the current her. When she started acting like a normal person, he felt relieved and wondered if it was unfair for her to continue changing so much. He told the village chief that from this, he could understand that his feelings were not what he thought they were. This was the story of a traumatized, heartbroken man. The village chief reminded the crown prince of the phrase, "Only those with primordial beauty can see the god," and the crown prince admitted it was a vague phrase. The village chief asked if he found it too vague, which surprised the crown prince, who wondered how he knew. The village chief asked if he had ever pondered the meaning of the word beauty. He explained to him that beauty means a person's existence is in its proper state. In other words, a person is in their true and ideal form. He told the crown prince that everything that makes him who he is will one day achieve balance and harmony, thus becoming complete. The village chief commented that beauty is indeed a very beautiful word. The crown prince realized that if beauty meant a person's true and ideal state, then the condition for meeting the deity was to be naturally true to oneself. This meant that Seraphie was now in her true and ideal state. The crown prince concluded that the possibility of her returning to her former personality was zero, while the village chief remarked that the starry sky that night was exceptionally beautiful. The next day, with the help of the elven village, all members of the expedition returned to the castle without any difficulty, except for Seraphie and Emperor Raven. Zephyr clung tightly to Seraphie, refusing to let go, and the crown prince asked her how long she would tolerate his willfulness. Seraphie solemnly promised Zephyr that she would return to visit and play with him. Zephyr, however, had a different understanding of her promise and, with an innocent smile, proposed that they get married the next time they met, which displeased the crown prince standing nearby. The crown prince turned and began to activate the magic teleportation circle, announcing it was time to leave, while Seraphie anxiously called for him to wait. Seeing him gradually disappear into the magical light, she panicked, thinking for a moment that he would leave her behind. But the crown prince suddenly grabbed her arm, pulled her towards him, held her tightly in the teleportation circle, and chided her, asking what she was doing, if she really wanted to be left behind, and criticizing her for standing still as if she had never teleported before. Seraphie replied in confusion that she had just spaced out, so the Crown Prince warned her in a serious tone not to so easily accept all of anyone's requests. Zephyr waved goodbye to them enthusiastically, thanking Seraphie for everything she had done, while the Crown Prince watched with a cold gaze. The Crown Prince silently bowed to the elven village chief in farewell. Upon arriving at their destination, Seraphie lost her balance for being unaccustomed to teleportation and fell to the ground. The Crown Prince looked at her resentfully and sarcastically asked how she could be so clumsy, wondering if she had lost all her muscles when she hit her head. In her mind, she hoped he wouldn't press the matter and responded to him coolly. Sitting on the ground, she thought about how she came from a world without magic, that this was her first time experiencing teleportation, and she was both curious and worried about whether she could survive in this world. The Crown Prince held out his hand to her, asking how long she planned to sit there and telling her to get up. She looked at his outstretched hand in shock, wondering why he was suddenly being so gentle, as he usually ignored her completely. She hesitantly thanked him, took his hand, and stood up, still confused by the change in him. She remembered Zephyr's warning to be careful, that the Crown Prince might lose control, and she anxiously wondered if he was putting too much pressure on himself and what would happen if his anger truly erupted. Her thoughts were interrupted by the Crown Prince's voice, who told her that he hadn't been able to talk to her last night because it was too late. Then, he actually offered a formal and clear apology for having pushed her so hard before, which left her in a daze. As she remembered Zephyr's warning that the Crown Prince was like a ticking time bomb, he continued to apologize, saying he hadn't meant to hurt her. Seraphie anxiously cut him off, asking him to stop and not to pressure himself anymore. She assured him she was fine and asked him not to worry and to just treat her as he always had. This caused him to become confused, wondering what she meant by that. She continued to plead, which only confused the Crown Prince more. In her mind, she explained that she wanted him to ignore her, despise her, and humiliate her, just like before. As proof of the mission's success, Zephyr seemed to have completed his coming-of-age ceremony smoothly, as the incidents caused by the demi-humans stopped completely less than a day after the squad's return. Thus, the Destined army returned to its peaceful daily life once more. But this peace did not last long, as some soldiers were surprised to hear Seraphie's voice, pleading for one of them to humiliate her, which left them utterly shocked. They peeked out from behind a pillar in confusion, wondering what was happening and who she was talking to. Vice Commander Damien approached and told them that some people preparing for a festival play had gotten lost, and he told them to leave to avoid causing trouble. The soldiers seemed to believe this explanation, with one wondering if it was really that simple, as he had thought something serious was happening, while another commented that the idea of acting sounded a bit strange. Meanwhile, Damien was scolding the Crown Prince, reminding him that he had warned him multiple times not to say such things in public, while Seraphie stood by, apologizing. Damien told Seraphie that it was problematic for her to be loudly making potentially misunderstood remarks in broad daylight, then turned to the Crown Prince, saying that getting into a loud argument with a woman was completely unacceptable. The Crown Prince replied that it was because she had said something strange. Damien angrily cut him off, declaring that it didn't matter now and that maintaining the Crown Prince's dignity was key to preserving order in the palace and all of Destined. Damien continued his harsh reprimand, loudly demanding how many times he had to repeat himself, but his shouting was suddenly cut short by a sharp pain. Damien coughed up blood and collapsed unconscious, and the Crown Prince and Seraphie rushed to him anxiously, with the Crown Prince calling his name in a panic. In the infirmary, the Crown Prince asked the doctor about Damien's condition, and after a moment of contemplation, the doctor replied that Damien had fallen into a deep sleep, seemingly due to a lack of sleep. This left Seraphie puzzled. The Crown Prince asked in surprise if he was just asleep, while Seraphie pointed out with concern that he had bled profusely from his mouth and nose. The doctor explained that any form of sleep deprivation would inevitably lead to deteriorating health. The doctor advised them that as long as stressful situations were avoided and he got plenty of sleep and rest, Damien would recover quickly. The doctor added that achieving this would require cooperation from those around him and requested their help. The Crown Prince reluctantly agreed, while Seraphie replied with a nervous laugh that she would of course cooperate. As they walked down the palace corridor, Seraphie worriedly wondered if Sir Damien would be all right, and the Crown Prince reassured her that there was no need to worry. Seraphie was surprised by his overconfidence, so he simply replied that he had already asked Damien himself. He explained to her that Damien had suffered from insomnia for years, but it had never caused health problems before. Before this, Seraphie had thought Damien had some illness she didn't know about, as he always seemed so calm and composed, and she guessed his condition might be insomnia. The Crown Prince asserted that, in any case, it was bad to put more stress on him, then demanded that Seraphie say those annoying things somewhere private, which left her wondering in confusion which things he meant. She apologized to him and asked if what she had just said had embarrassed him. A look of anger appeared on his face as he asked, furious, if she was being serious or mocking him, to which she replied that she didn't understand why he was angry. She explained to him that she had only said that to make him feel better. He threw the question back at her in astonishment, wondering if she was asking him to ignore, despise, and humiliate her for his own good. She explained her logic to him, saying that he should ignore, despise, and humiliate her because that's how he had always treated her. She went on, saying she told him not to force himself to be gentle, wondering what was wrong with that. In her mind, she guessed the reason might be that she, a person he was supposed to detest, was acting as if she would sacrifice herself for him, and he wasn't happy to see that. But she reassured herself that if that was the case, there was no need to worry. She decided to take this opportunity to announce her decision. So she told him with a bright smile not to worry, that she was resigning as of today. She continued, saying she would disappear so he wouldn't have to see her anymore. He looked at her in utter shock and asked what she had just said. Seraphie felt incredibly happy, thinking the solution was to be out of his sight and wondering why she hadn't considered it before, thus deciding to give him his freedom back. But her happiness didn't last long, as she thought of the kitchen and worried about who would cook if she quit. She hesitantly asked the Crown Prince if she could work for a little while longer until a new cook was found. The Crown Prince turned and walked away, muttering that she was as selfish as ever, then coldly told her to do as she pleased. He said that she had never listened to his opinion before. Seraphie watched him walk away, thinking it was strange and that things weren't supposed to go this way. She wondered why he had reacted as if he were hurt and felt she had made a grave mistake. Later, as two soldiers were walking through the palace, Seraphie greeted them, and one of the soldiers returned the greeting. The first soldier seemed confused, repeating tomorrow at noon, and his companion asked him where the person he was just talking to was going, wondering if he had seen a ghost, or something similar. The Crown Prince suddenly appeared behind them and chidingly asked if there were ghosts in Destined. The two soldiers were terrified and addressed him by his title in utter confusion. Both immediately denied it, insisting they must have seen wrong, explaining that they thought they had seen Seraphie there, but it was just an illusion. The Crown Prince crossed his arms and looked at them, simply saying that he understood the situation. Seraphie felt a sense of relief, as she had managed to avoid him and had almost been discovered just now. She lamented internally that she had managed to run so far from the office, only to run into him there. Zephyr's warning replayed in her mind, that Raven was like a ticking time bomb, and that getting close to him would make one lose their sanity. So she decided that for both their sakes, she had to keep her distance. As she was thinking this, she realized it was hard to avoid running into him while wandering around, and wondered if there was a place she could hide and rest. Her steps led her to the royal library, which was indeed magnificent. She began to wander between the huge bookshelves, wondering if she could find any romance novels among these books. But what caught her was a title completely different from her interests, a book on practical cooking magic. This brought back memories of her student days, making her wonder if all worlds had such books. She was unaware that the Crown Prince was also in the same place, browsing through books in another corner of the library. She sat at a table, engrossed in her book, while he watched her from a distance. A sudden creak broke her concentration, and she looked up to find him standing before her, asking seriously if she had become a completely different person. He told her that lately, she had surprised him every time. She panicked internally, wondering why he was here and why he appeared wherever she went. He chidingly asked if he was forbidden from being here, so she replied in confusion that she was just wondering why he had come. He replied that he had always loved reading and therefore frequented the library, then pointed out that this was the first time he had ever seen her reading a book. This made her think sarcastically to herself that it must be earth-shattering news to see someone like her reading. She explained to him that she had come in out of curiosity and then saw a book about cooking magic and started reading it. The Crown Prince was surprised by her interest in a magic book, so she explained to him that she had heard cooking would be easier and food storage would become simpler if she learned cooking magic. The Crown Prince then asked her why she was going to so much trouble now, since she had already announced she was quitting. This surprised her, and she wondered why he would ask that. So she simply replied that it was her job, and went on to explain that if she could prepare more delicious food more easily and quickly, she would naturally want to learn. Her words seemed to convince him, so he smiled slightly and said he understood. Their conversation was interrupted by the voice of an elegant lady, who expressed surprise at seeing them together in this place. She approached and greeted the Crown Prince and Seraphie, saying it had been a long time. She asked with a sly smile what they were talking about while they were alone together. She expressed her surprise at seeing them together in such a place, and continued, saying that them being alone in a dimly lit place could arouse suspicion and lead people to the wrong conclusions. The lady asked the Crown Prince if he was worried, but he coolly replied that he was not. The Crown Prince announced to her that he was busy and was leaving now, then turned to avoid the lady. But the lady suddenly turned to Seraphie and asked how long it had been and if she had been lonely while she was away. Seraphie was confused. She didn't recognize the lady, but guessed from her casual way of speaking that they must be friends, so she replied in confusion that she didn't remember how long it had been. The lady reminded her that she had been very upset about her going on a 3-month trip, wondering how she could have forgotten so quickly. Seraphie felt embarrassed and claimed she had momentarily forgotten. The lady commented that her appearance, clothes, and makeup had changed drastically, saying she looked like a completely different person, and asked if something had happened, while Seraphie looked bewildered. She then moved closer to her, examining her with a curious expression. Pondering the matter, the lady added that Seraphie's presence in the library was a surprise in itself, then sarcastically whispered to her that they didn't sell dresses here. Seraphie calmly replied that she had just happened to pass by the library and decided to read a book while she was there. The lady was surprised and dismissive of her words, wondering if she was joking again, and reminded her that she used to hate books the most, saying they were boring, and sarcastically wondered since when she had started pretending to be a researcher, concluding that it was truly surprising to see Seraphie reading. Seraphie explained that she thought the book might be interesting and useful for cooking, which piqued the lady's curiosity. The lady commented that it was so interesting she was now interested in cooking, and Seraphie wondered internally whether she was being praised or mocked. The lady suggested she leave this unsuitable place and go shopping, telling her that her favorite designer was there and his new collection of dresses had just been released, inviting her to go see it together. Seraphie thought to herself that she had no idea who her favorite designer was, but she politely declined, saying she wanted to read more and learn magic right now. The mention of magic greatly surprised the lady. The Crown Prince observed them from a distance, commenting that this answer was more logical for the original Seraphie's character, as she would have been more inclined to hire a magician rather than learn magic herself. Seraphie was at a loss, wondering what to say so as not to arouse her friend's suspicion. She told her that she had recently changed her mind, that she might have acted a certain way in the past, but things were different now. She added that reading was fun, cooking was fulfilling, and she felt happy when everyone enjoyed her food. She admitted to her friend that, frankly, even while reading, she didn't understand what the book was saying and hadn't understood a single page so far. She added with a smile that it was still fun, though. The Crown Prince observed the situation carefully, while the lady looked at her with a strange expression and then commented that she seemed like a completely different person. The lady suddenly changed the subject, saying she wouldn't get in her way today and suggested they go together next time, to which Seraphie reluctantly agreed. The lady turned to leave, but she thought to herself with a sinister look that she didn't know what had happened to Seraphie, but she was sure she would never be able to leave her again. After she left, Seraphie decided she needed to read a slightly simpler book today. The next day, Seraphie ran into the lady again and recognized her as the girl she had met yesterday, whose name seemed to be Rosaline. Rosaline had come to the library to look for books on fashion. Rosaline once again suggested that since they had met, they should go shopping for the dress by the designer mentioned yesterday. Seraphie tried to apologize, explaining that she was here to read. Rosaline showed her annoyance, reminding her that she had refused the invitation yesterday as well and wondered if they were no longer friends. Seraphie strongly denied it and tried to clarify that she really wanted to read. But Rosaline thought to herself that she knew she would never give up on her, Rosaline acted happy and invited her to join her today, so Seraphie reluctantly agreed. Rosaline enthusiastically pulled her along, and Seraphie felt herself being carried away by her fast pace. As they walked, Seraphie decided she would read her book tomorrow. Rosaline thought sarcastically to herself that Seraphie was such a fool and had fallen completely under her control. But Seraphie found it a bit strange, as Rosaline had said they were going to look at dresses. When they arrived, another lady greeted them. Rosaline told her she had heard the new collection was out, so she came to take a look. Seraphie guessed that the original Seraphie character must have come here often, but she added in her mind that the character wasn't normal to begin with. The lady showed them the new collection for the season, which included strangely designed hats and clothes, much to Seraphie's great surprise. Seraphie suddenly remembered the ridiculous dresses the original owner had, and wondered if she had bought out the entire store, as the dresses were so strange they were hard to distinguish from rags. Rosaline asked for her opinion on the new collection, finding it cute. Seraphie hesitantly replied that it was nice, but inwardly she found the decorations too exaggerated and bizarre. Rosaline suggested she try on one of the dresses, as it seemed to suit her, but Seraphie politely declined, while Rosaline insisted that she try it on. The shop owner also joined in, recommending another dress to Seraphie, asserting it would look great on her, but Seraphie tried to evade. Seraphie loudly declared that she had plenty of dresses at home and was fine as she was, trying to end the situation. Both Rosaline and the shop owner laughed, thinking she was joking, but Seraphie insisted she wasn't joking at all. Seraphie had to make up another excuse, claiming she had spent all her allowance and would come back to buy it next time, which caused them great surprise, making Seraphie feel that these people were surprised by every normal thing she said. Rosaline asked if she was out of money, and Seraphie replied that her father had told her he would kick her out if she kept spending money as she pleased. This led Rosaline to comment, in surprise, that she hadn't expected the dupe to say that. Rosaline was indirectly mocking Seraphie, but Seraphie found it strange that her friend was as eccentric as she was, and that Rosaline's taste in clothes was very peculiar. Rosaline tried on a strange hat and asked for Seraphie's opinion, and Seraphie compared her and herself to peacocks. The shop owner praised Rosaline's taste, and the latter decided to buy the hat. Rosaline continued to pick out more clothes and thanked the shop owner for her help. After the shopping was over, the shop owner bid them a warm farewell, looking forward to their next visit. Seraphie told Rosaline she was going home, but Rosaline asked her to wait a moment, which annoyed Seraphie. Rosaline suddenly gave her a gift, saying it was something she had picked out for her. Rosaline explained that she hadn't been able to bring back any souvenirs from her trip and asked her to accept this gift as compensation. Seraphie realized this was why Rosaline had insisted on inviting her shopping, because she felt guilty for not bringing a gift. Seraphie was at a loss. She appreciated the sentiment, but she couldn't accept the kind of dress she had just seen and wondered what to do in this situation. Rosaline asked in a sad tone if she hated the gift. Seraphie recalled painful memories from her past life, when she always felt she was the only one who cared about others. Yet some people accused her of being emotionless and unloved. She realized she had indeed been cold to others. Seraphie decided she had to express her feelings in words so that the other person would receive them, so she apologized to Rosaline, saying she hadn't meant to hurt her. She thanked Rosaline for the gift and promised to cherish it, which made Rosaline very happy, who said she would have been very upset if she hadn't accepted it. Rosaline asked for her opinion on the gift, and Seraphie thought to herself that she wouldn't wear that dress anyway. But she still replied somewhat hesitantly that she thanked her and that she was right. Rosaline showed her delight that the design had won her approval, while Seraphie was convinced the whole thing was a trap. Rosaline noticed that Seraphie hadn't been wearing makeup lately, asked if she had forgotten how, and offered to do it for her personally. She enthusiastically invited her to her house. This request to leave immediately surprised and shocked her. Seraphie began to feel dizzy and weak, thinking she might faint if this continued and that she needed to go home and rest. She apologized to Rosaline, saying she was going back now. Rosaline showed her disappointment, but understood since she was tired. Seraphie thanked Rosaline, who suggested they hang out until dawn next time. This last sentence sent a chill down Seraphie's spine and made her feel exhausted. Just thinking about it was tiring. Back at the palace, she collapsed on the floor from sheer exhaustion, murmuring that she couldn't even stand. Rosaline's wicked words echoed in her mind, and she imagined her inviting her to play until dawn, screaming in terror, begging her to stop. Meanwhile, in the library, Rosaline was wandering between the bookshelves, feeling bored and wondering when Seraphie would arrive and what fun things they could do today. Suddenly, she sensed someone nearby, but saw no one, so she guessed it was her imagination. Meanwhile, Seraphie was hiding behind a bookshelf, feeling she had miraculously survived and deciding she had to get out of there immediately. Later, as the Crown Prince was walking down a corridor, one of his guards asked if he was going to the library again today. The guards commented that the Crown Prince was a truly remarkable person, that they had known him since childhood and had never seen him slack off at work for even a single day. The Crown Prince arrived at his destination, feeling exhausted and thinking it would be nice to take a nap like someone he knew. Hearing the soldiers whispering about his stamina and envying him, he thought that if he could, he would lie down on the floor right now, just like Seraphie, who was collapsed there. He approached her and asked what she was doing there, and she jumped, addressing him by his title in shock. Seraphie began to explain the situation to him in utter confusion, stating that she had gone to the library to find Rosaline waiting for her, and when she tried to escape, she was worried Rosaline would see her, which resulted in her crawling on the floor. The Crown Prince looked at her, thinking she truly had a talent for infuriating people in new ways every day. He told her he was on his way to the library, and she replied that was nice for him. He wondered if that was it, and she asked if there was anything else. He told her that seeing her crawling on the cold floor, he couldn't help but feel sorry for her and offered to help her just this once, but she politely refused his request. The Crown Prince offered to get the book she wanted for her, but she told him it was fine, that she was already used to this place. The Crown Prince was then surprised, wondering how she had adapted so quickly, while she told him to take care of himself anyway. Her response shocked him, and her words left him bewildered. He had gone out of his way to show her kindness, yet she had refused him while lying on the floor, and then told him to take care of himself. How dare she? He thought angrily that this was the height of arrogance, and wondered if he should charge her with insult. Anger filled his heart as he thought about how she had followed him everywhere until recently, and why she was suddenly acting as if she hated him to the bone. He recalled past scenes where she would ask him why he wouldn't eat the cookies she had prepared, and he would reply that he didn't want them. When she asked him why he always treated her like an enemy, he would answer frankly that it was because he truly disliked her. He felt he was in no position to say anything about it now. In another instance, the Crown Prince was surprised by Rosaline's appearance. She said it was a coincidence to meet him in such a place, and offered him some cookies she had baked herself, suggesting he could have some if he liked. Later, a soldier was happily eating the cookies and told his comrade that the Crown Prince had given them to him. Suddenly, as he said he was hungry, the soldier felt famished and dizzy. His comrade told him to stop making such foolish jokes and to hurry up and eat the cookies, as the Crown Prince was busy. But one of the soldiers spat out the cookie in disgust, wondering what this disgusting thing was while Seraphie observed from a distance. The soldier commented that he had fallen into the Crown Prince's trap and wondered what he had done to make him hate him so much. The soldier realized the Crown Prince might already know he was the one who sent the chain letter. Suddenly, the Crown Prince appeared behind Seraphie, realizing it was the soldier's doing, which confused her. The Crown Prince told her he hadn't known about it before, which was why he had cornered Damien, and that he would apologize to him later. Seraphie turned to him, wondering how he would deal with the boy who sent the letter and what he would do to him. He replied with sarcastic coldness that he was considering cutting off his head. She froze on the spot at the horror of his words, but he quickly laughed and said he was just joking. Seraphie was terrified, thinking that even as a joke, it was truly frightening when it came from someone who actually had the power to do it. The Crown Prince sat beside her, told her that since he had scared her, he would tell her something interesting, and asked if she knew. The place where they were sitting was not visible from the library, which surprised her. Then, he handed her the book she wanted to read, and she asked in surprise how he knew. He replied that she had been repeatedly saying she wanted to learn cooking magic, and of course he would know, because nothing in Destined could be hidden from him. Seraphie hesitated inwardly, wondering if she should take the book from his hand. The Crown Prince ordered her to take it, but she refused, saying she was fine. So he insisted on knowing the reason, and she shouted in his face that she was trying to keep a distance between them and that it was dangerous to be with him. She continued that it was to protect him and begged him to understand, but he described her words as terrible and demanded she explain clearly. Seraphie began to explain awkwardly. She told him that the elf had told her that if she stayed by his side, his emotions would become unstable and he would turn into a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. He retorted, asking if it was the elf who told her to stay away from him, and she answered in the affirmative. He shouted at her angrily, telling her to calm down and not let a child's words affect her like that. She told him that elves have keen intuition and can read human emotions, and that the elf said his emotions only became unstable when she was nearby. He replied angrily, asserting that he knew that. He explained to her that they were in a dangerous forest where anything could happen, and since she was the only civilian there, it would be strange if he wasn't nervous about her. She apologized to him, saying she didn't know he thought that way, and that she truly thought he hated her. He advised her not to misunderstand, that he was loyal to his position as the crown prince, and that regardless of personal feelings, it was his duty to protect the people. He added that the power he possessed was on a completely different level from that of an ordinary citizen, that this was nothing special to him, and that he wasn't doing it out of affection for her, so she shouldn't misunderstand. She replied that she wasn't misunderstanding. The crown prince thought angrily that the elf was spreading ridiculous rumors and that he had to go to the forest to teach him a lesson now, while Seraphie was left confused, not knowing what to do. She wondered if this was the only magic book and wished there were more like it, as more books would be more useful for learning. But she realized the problem was that she couldn't go to the library. She thought of a solution to this problem as she looked at the crown prince. The crown prince asked if she needed more, and she was secretly pleased because her plan had worked. He asked if she had ever learned magic before, as he had never heard of her doing so, and she replied that it was her first time. He was surprised that she was even reading the book and then wondered how she was managing it. She replied that the reason was because she wanted to learn magic. His confusion grew, and he asked why she was reading the book since she had never learned magic before, explaining that she wouldn't be able to understand it. Then he asked if she had taken a magical aptitude test. His words confused her, and she wondered what this test was. He looked at her hesitantly for a moment, then told her to follow him. Seraphie thought to herself that learning magic required a basic condition, because one must first ensure they have magical ability, which is the power necessary to use magic. And so, she finally found herself about to take this fateful test. She stood before a huge door and asked the crown prince if this was the place where magical power was measured, which he confirmed before she stepped forward. The crown prince told her there was one thing that had to be done first, which puzzled her. He grabbed her injured shoulder, and a mysterious, divine light emanated from his palm. Seraphie was amazed and whispered that the pain was gone. She asked blankly how he did it, and he replied that it was nothing special and that once she learned magic, she would be able to do it too, which sparked her enthusiasm and desire to learn as soon as possible. In short, Seraphie realized he had healed her shoulder so she could move things, so she thought he had done it for that purpose, but he told her there was no need for thanks. The crown prince pointed to a stone that looked quite ordinary and explained to her that the test was simple. She just had to hold it, as it was a stone that became lighter the stronger the holder's magical power was. He warned her not to take it lightly, as people with weak magical power couldn't even lift it, and she could get hurt if she underestimated it. Seraphie reached for the stone, but she lifted it with one hand with surprising ease, leaving both Seraphie and the crown prince stunned. She wondered if this was the right stone, as she felt it was just an ordinary rock, but the crown prince assured her that this stone had never left this hall. The crown prince recalled in his memory the last time the elf's magic didn't work on her, and a startling possibility flashed through his mind. Seraphie looked at the stone in confusion and called his name. The crown prince told her that perhaps they should run a few other tests. She looked at him in complete confusion, not understanding what was happening. Seraphie suddenly found herself surrounded by a large group of wizards in strange robes, with the crown prince standing by her side. One of them wondered why they had all been summoned. The wizards looked as if they hadn't seen the sun in a long time. One of them complained that the light was too bright, and another wondered how long he had been in his lab. As she looked at them, fear took hold of her, and she thought about running away before it was too late, while wondering in confusion what was happening now. The Crown Prince reassured her that it wasn't dangerous and that he was going to test her now. But she thought that the presence of so many people must mean it was something serious and asked about the type of test. He explained to her that they were going to test her personality type and the type of magic that affects her by having people use magic on her, which left her in utter shock. She asked in surprise if he was using her as a test subject. He replied with a sly smile that it was something like that, which made her freeze in fear. The wizard showed great enthusiasm, wondering if any kind of magic could be used, and formed a long line, proposing to turn her into a cat or a dog. They were interrupted by a senior wizard, who asked the old wizard if he wanted to test whether her abilities could be neutralized and wondered about the source of this magic and what the goal of this test was. The old wizard replied that he didn't know. His answer caused dissatisfaction in the wizard, who wondered if more research should be done on magic neutralization techniques, and if the defense magic they had created was not enough, reminding him that he had praised them when they announced the update the day before. The wizard shouted at his colleague, who asked him what was going on, saying that he didn't know either, and that if they were curious, they should go ask the Crown Prince himself. The Crown Prince told the wizards that their cooperation would be a great help to him, that he was researching magic and wanted the senior wizards to conduct the tests, and promised to give them a suitable reward. The Crown Prince's words left a deep impression on the wizards, moving them deeply. They enthusiastically declared that they would do their best for the Crown Prince and would devote all their energy to this matter, and that it was time to show their true abilities. One of the wizards approached Seraphie and announced the start of the test. One of the wizards began to cast a spell intended to make Seraphie's hair grow long, but nothing happened. Another wizard tried to turn her into a cat with a spell, but again, nothing happened, with the wizard commenting that there was no reaction. The failed attempts continued, with one even trying to turn her into a man, but in the end, nothing happened. The wizards praised the Crown Prince, expressing their admiration for the perfection of his experimental magic. The Crown Prince thanked them for their hard work, and they praised his humility, believing his name would go down in history. They then asked for permission to leave, and Seraphie felt a sense of relief after they were gone. The Crown Prince was tired from the presence of so many people, and Seraphie noted that he was an introvert. The Crown Prince told her he had expected this, but her body was even stranger than he had imagined. He explained to her that her body repels or neutralizes any magic cast upon it, which was why the elf's healing magic and the wizard's magical power had no effect on her. Except for one person, no magic or magical power could affect her. He pointed to himself and said that person was him, which caused her great surprise. He told her that he knew what she was thinking, that her facial expression revealed she wanted to ask why, and that they were now having a real conversation. He admitted that, frankly, he didn't know the reason either, but the indisputable fact was that only his magic could affect her. Seraphie wondered inwardly if this matter was complicated because she was possessing another body, or if the original Seraphie's obsessive love had caused her body to evolve to accept only Raven. Her thoughts were interrupted by the realization that this doesn't matter right now, and she anxiously wondered if this meant she couldn't learn magic. The Crown Prince told her that the situation was different, and her being unaffected by others' magic had nothing to do with her using her own. This was, of course, assuming she had magical power. Seraphie was surprised, pointing out that she had been able to use a teleportation magic circle created by someone else. He explained to her that it was a type of magic that connected places and moved people between them, and it likely worked because it didn't involve magic flowing into a person's body and affecting it. She held the book, wondering if she could find magic in it. The Crown Prince scoffed at her, comparing it to a child who couldn't even hold a pen, wanting to write a novel. She apologized to him, saying she just wanted to learn quickly. Rosaline observed all of this from a distance. With an angry look, the Crown Prince told her that if she wanted to learn magic so badly, he would teach her himself, and ordered her to come to his office during her break starting tomorrow. Later in his office, the Crown Prince was examining the magic book, thinking that it was very difficult for a complete novice to read. He decided that if she struggled, adjusting the difficulty to this level should be fine. Suddenly, he heard a knock on the door and granted them entry. Rosaline entered and asked him what she should do. The Crown Prince suddenly stood up from his seat and asked what had happened. Rosaline complained that Seraphie wouldn't play with her. The Crown Prince told her to leave as he was busy, but she pleaded with him to listen to her. Elsewhere, Seraphie was walking, thinking to herself, and wondering if this was really okay. It was good that Raven had become gentler, but she couldn't help but worry when she thought of the original story. Seraphie noticed the Crown Prince's office door was open and heard Rosaline ask the Crown Prince if he was sure it was all right. Rosaline told the Crown Prince it was dangerous, and that Seraphie had been acting strangely lately. She went on to say that she thought he should know about it, and that he would be shocked when he heard. Then, with feigned shock, she revealed to him that Seraphie was actually trying to cook, considering it a scandal. She pointed out to the Crown Prince that he was the master of the place where Seraphie worked, working as a cook, but the Crown Prince didn't seem surprised at all and coldly asked if she was still there. Outside, Seraphie was confused, wondering what she should do, and whether she should go back now. Rosaline slammed her hand on the table angrily, asking the Crown Prince if he was really satisfied with this situation. She reminded him that he had gone through some interesting experiences because of Seraphie. It was all thanks to her, she whispered slyly to him, reminding him of the incident where his food was drugged. She expressed disbelief that he had let her off so easily, asserting that she was worried about him. The Crown Prince replied to her sternly that he wasn't so weak as to need her worry. He then ordered her to leave, saying he wouldn't punish her for entering without permission, but she had to get out now. Rosaline commented that what happened to that woman was truly tragic, explaining that she was referring to Mariette, who had done nothing but have tea with him, yet Seraphie had killed her for it. Seraphie recalled her maid's words. The maid had told her that the lady was very famous and that no one in the country didn't know her. Seraphie wondered if there was another person as crazy as the original Seraphie. The maid told her that the lady had put an aphrodisiac in the Crown Prince's food and tried to sneak into his bedroom that night, but was caught and thrown out, and reminded her that she had been furious at the time, describing her actions as a crime, and that they had found it difficult to stop her from going to kill her. So Seraphie wondered if she was the one who had snuck into the bedroom. The maid continued that after being rejected, the woman committed suicide by taking poison right in front of the Crown Prince, thinking her level of madness was on a whole other level. Seraphie thought that the original Seraphie might have had stalking tendencies, but she wouldn't do something like putting an aphrodisiac in his food or committing suicide in front of him, so she asked the maid for the woman's name. The maid replied that her name was Mariette, and Seraphie received a huge shock, realizing it couldn't be. She wondered in horror if she had really killed her, not the current her, but the original Seraphie. She realized it was no longer just about her being a crazy woman, but that she was possessing the body of a murderer and a pervert, and she would rather go back to being the ordinary crazy woman from the original story. She thought that she had never expected to face such a huge shock. Rosaline told the Crown Prince that Seraphie had not only poisoned Mariette, but had even tried to assault him after giving him an aphrodisiac, and she couldn't understand how she dared to stay by his side, while Seraphie realized she was the one who had used the aphrodisiac after all. Rosaline continued that if it weren't for the Brinia's family, Seraphie would no longer be in this world, and that the matter was truly tragic. The Crown Prince interrupted her with a cold question, reminding her that she was supposed to be Seraphie's friend. A look of confusion appeared on Rosaline's face, and the Crown Prince told her that based on her stance, his judgment seemed to have been mistaken. Rosaline claimed that Seraphie was her precious friend, but there couldn't be another victim like Mariette. She expressed her concern that her dear friend might choose the wrong path again, and that was all she was worried about. The Crown Prince looked at Rosaline with coldness and disgust. He thought to himself that for some reason, talking to this woman sent a chill down his spine. The Crown Prince sarcastically commented that she was as interested in other people's private affairs as ever. She replied that it was because she was naturally kind-hearted. The Crown Prince gave a sarcastic smile, saying he had forgotten about it, and thanks to her, he had remembered many things he had forgotten, and that she could be quite useful to him. Rosaline showed her delight at being useful, and the Crown Prince thanked her for it. He told her that he had many state affairs to attend to and could not waste any more time, and promised her that he would make sure to give her a fitting reward later, which a lady as considerate of others' feelings as her would surely understand. Rosaline apologized for taking up his precious time while he was busy and asked for leave to depart. As she was leaving, she ran into Vice Commander Damien. She looked at him with an admiring expression, thinking that he was very handsome, but it was a pity he was just a subordinate of the Crown Prince. After she left, Damien asked Seraphie if she was all right. She replied in confusion that she had heard everything. so he asked if she meant. She replied that she was talking about the fact that she was a murderer, a pervert, and a predator, and asked Damien in confusion if he already knew about it. But before he could give an affirmative answer, she cut him off, saying that would make things much simpler. She then grabbed his arm and told him to follow her to a private place to talk, which caused him confusion. She explained to him that the truth was she had injured her head not long ago, so he asked if she was referring to the kitchen explosion incident. She told him that her memory had become hazy since then and that she was in a bit of a difficult situation now, so Damien understood the matter. He asked how exactly he could help her, so she asked him to tell her everything he knew about that incident. Damien told her that before coming to Destined, he had heard a rumor that a noble lady had tried to assault the crown prince by putting an aphrodisiac in his food and sneaking into his bedroom. But after the crown prince rejected her, she committed suicide in front of him. He asserted that the name he had heard at the time was the very one Rosaline had mentioned earlier, which was Mariette. Seraphie asked him what he meant by at the time, so he explained to her that since he began assisting the crown prince in Destined, he had learned the hidden truth of the matter. Seraphie wondered in amazement what that hidden truth was. Damien revealed to her that the person who visited the crown prince's bedroom that day was. At that moment, a young crown prince was waking up in his bed. He heard a knock on the door and asked for the identity of the knocker, only to be surprised by someone appearing before him. He asked the servants who had suddenly entered what the meaning of this was and why they had come in the middle of the night, directing a question to one of the maids who served as his food taster. The maid knelt before him, relieved for his safety. The crown prince was shocked, wondering how there could have been an aphrodisiac in the food he ate. One of the maids told him that she was worried something might have happened to him, but seeing him safe and sound, she was relieved, as she had thought something irreversible had occurred. The maid commented that this had happened precisely because the crown prince refused the food tasting to detect poison. The crown prince coldly wondered what had made the servants worry to this extent, reminding them that he was the one who had defeated a dragon. Had they forgotten? One of the maids told him that they shouldn't take this matter lightly, and continued with concern that even the smallest problem could cost them their lives. The maid realized she had overstepped her bounds, so she bowed to him and apologized profusely. She begged for his forgiveness and pardon. The crown prince told her he wasn't angry and to raise her head, wondering if he had ever punished any of them before. He assured her that no one else knew about this and that he wouldn't tell anyone, so there was no need to worry. The maid was moved to tears with gratitude, but he told her that he was the one who should be apologizing and promised her that from now on, he would no longer refuse the food tasting to detect poison. The servants bowed deeply to him in thanks. One of the maids requested that he must inform them immediately if he felt unwell, and he agreed. The crown prince thought to himself that no matter what he said, it was probably useless to them, and that their sole purpose for existing was to keep him absolutely safe in his rightful place. Suddenly, the crown prince sensed someone's presence. He opened the door to find Seraphie in an elegant black dress, realizing she had been there all along. He said he had suspected it, but he hadn't expected her to go this far. Seraphie asked him if there was a suspicious person, and the crown prince wondered in confusion what she was talking about. She explained to him that she was asking if there were any suspicious people or anyone trying to attack him. The crown prince asked what on earth she was talking about and ordered her to get out, thinking she was putting on an act. He knew she wasn't in her right mind, but there were some lines that shouldn't be crossed. The person in the room disappeared, and Seraphie wondered in shock who that was. The crown prince watched her look out the window and sighed. Seraphie noticed a strand of red hair on the window and realized the intruder was a woman with long hair. She confirmed to herself that someone was definitely here and wondered if someone had broken into the room and if he had allowed someone in. He shouted angrily in her face, telling her to stop. She tried to convince him it wasn't a lie and that someone was really here. He ordered the guards to take her away, so she desperately called out his name. She pleaded with him to believe her, that there was someone hiding in the bedroom. The door closed behind her, and the crown prince sighed, feeling his patience had run out. He thought that this was the limit of his patience. Elsewhere, the arrival of the crown prince was announced, and he requested entry. He was received by an older man, who welcomed him, saying it had been a long time since he had seen him, and asked the reason for his early visit. The crown prince told his father, the emperor, that there was something he wanted to talk to him about. The emperor told him he had already heard from Duke Brinius that Seraphie had come to see him last night. The emperor asked with a sly smile what had happened, and if they had spent the night together. So the crown prince condemned the question, saying he hadn't paid any attention to Seraphie at all. The The emperor reminded him that the duke had suggested they get married, which would be a joyous occasion. The crown prince insisted that he had no interest in her, and that he believed he had already told him that many times before. The emperor criticized him for always pushing her away and asked why he couldn't be a little nicer to her like when they were children. The emperor continued that the Brinius family was one of the most prominent noble families in the country, and that he should be happy that the daughter of this family loved him. But the crown prince interrupted him, telling him that Seraphie had put an aphrodisiac in his food. Silence ensued for a moment. The emperor mockingly wondered if he was suggesting arresting the daughter of the Brinius family, and the crown prince called out to him angrily. The arrival of the duke was announced, so the emperor coldly commented that they had finally arrived and were so slow. The emperor told the crown prince he could go back now, but before the emperor could leave, the crown prince stopped him and shouted at him angrily, saying he cared more about dealing with the nobles than his own son. The emperor replied that he knew how the country's economy worked. The emperor thought to himself that everything was thanks to the nobles, and the country system could only be maintained when the nobles bowed their heads to the emperor. For this reason, to prevent them from getting unnecessary ideas, he sometimes had to give them a taste of sweetness, and interacting with the nobles was the emperor's duty. The crown prince questioned him angrily, asking if he knew what the nobles he loved so much were doing behind his back. The emperor replied that perhaps he didn't understand because he was young and that he lacked flexibility. The crown prince replied that if he acted on a whim, heads would roll, and a single mistake could cost the lives of thousands of soldiers. If he were lenient, everyone around him would probably be dead by now. The emperor told him that being so harsh would not make him a good emperor. He ordered a guard to open the door. As the emperor left, the crown prince wondered if it was precisely because of the emperor's indecisiveness that everyone around him had died. He thought sarcastically that it was a great blessing that he alone could wear a gentle smile on a throne he had climbed over the bodies of those around him. The emperor looked at him angrily and asked what he had just said. But the emperor soon smiled, thinking he had spoken very well, and it seemed he had acquired another necessary quality to be an emperor, which pleased him. The emperor left, while the crown prince pondered his expectations of his father. A few days later, the crown prince felt tired in his office, but he noticed his mind was unusually clear. He recalled the memory of Seraphie giving him cookies, and now he demanded that she stay away from him. He realized that it was because Seraphie was not here that peace was maintained. He considered her a cancer to society and wanted to get rid of her, but wondered if there was a way. Then, he granted someone entry. The maid told him that Lady Mariette had arrived. The crown prince realized he had forgotten about today's appointment and agreed to meet with her. The maids watched the crown prince walk away, noting that he seemed to be in an unusually good mood, a sentiment they privately agreed upon. The crown prince felt someone staring at him, which confused him. The maids conversed in low voices, one wondering if this was the first time the crown prince was having tea alone with a lady, another expressing curiosity about the nature of his relationship with Lady Mariette, and a third guessing they might have a special relationship. They continued to speculate, anticipating that Mariette might confess and that it could end with them dating. The crown prince suddenly interrupted them, telling them he had heard everything they were talking about. So they immediately apologized in a panic, explaining that they were just curious because they were happy for him. The crown prince sternly explained to them that this was not a confession and warned them not to misunderstand. So they obeyed his command in silence. In the palace garden, the crown prince sat with Lady Mariette and began the conversation, saying he had heard she had something she wanted to talk to him about. Mariette hesitantly replied that she did, while the crown prince, sipping his tea, thought about the word confession mentioned by the maids. Suddenly, Mariette confessed her love to him, which surprised him so much that he nearly choked on his drink. She quickly corrected herself, insisting that he did not have to reciprocate her feelings and that she was happy just to see him. The crown prince seemed moved by her words, and she continued, saying that the happiness of the one she loves is her happiness. And she concluded her confession by insisting that she believed this with all her heart. The crown prince couldn't help but let out a low laugh, so Mariette asked if he was mocking her, but he assured her that he was definitely not doing so. Mariette took a sip of her tea in confusion. The crown prince told her that this was the first time he had received such a sudden confession, then smiled and praised her, describing her as a pure and warm-hearted person. He then noticed that Mariette was distracted, so he asked if something was wrong, and at the same time, feeling that perhaps he had been rude, he formally apologized to her. and explained to her that the reason he laughed was by no means to mock her feelings. In an instant, his expression turned grim, and Mariette suddenly collapsed to the ground, and he shouted for help. The servants rushed towards her, and the crown prince, in a stern tone, ordered them to summon a doctor immediately. A maid called out to him in concern, while at the same time, Seraphie, hiding in the bushes, watched the scene in shock. The crown prince, extremely furious, turned towards her hiding place and shouted threateningly. Seraphie was terrified and muttered a denial of her involvement in the matter. An image of Mariette adding a mysterious powder to the teapot flashed through Seraphie's mind. Seraphie realized the terrible truth, confirming that it was Mariette who had put an aphrodisiac in the tea. She worriedly contemplated what to do, whether to knock over the tea and leave, but soon an evil smile appeared on Seraphie's face as she decided she needed a real and proper revenge. Seraphie used a stone to lure Mariette away from the table. Mariette walked towards the direction of the sound, thinking that the crown prince had finally arrived. Then Mariette heard another sound coming from the direction of the garden entrance. So she headed there and was stopped at the entrance by a maid, who offered to help, but Mariette seemed confused and hesitated, unsure how to respond. Mariette worriedly asked the maid about the crown prince's arrival time, and the latter replied that she believed he would be there soon. Meanwhile, Seraphie switched the cups. Mariette thanked the maid and decided to return to the table to wait for the crown prince. Mariette returned to the tea table in the garden and noticed that something seemed different from before, which caused her confusion. Meanwhile, Seraphie watched her from a distance, worriedly wondering if Mariette had discovered what she had done. Mariette tried to hide her nervousness by feigning calmness and admiring the beauty of the flowers, commenting that her nerves had calmed down a bit. But Seraphie had already decided to expose her in front of Raven, telling him that she had put an aphrodisiac in his drink to embarrass her. But what happened shocked everyone. Mariette suddenly collapsed, and the crown prince shouted for help, ordering everyone to summon a doctor immediately. Seraphie stood there in a daze, unable to understand what had happened. The crown prince, furious, cast a sharp, threatening gaze at Seraphie. Seraphie told the crown prince that she had found a hair in his bedroom the previous night, the exact same color as Mariette's. Seraphie fell into a panic as she remembered trying to tell him someone was in his room, but he hadn't believed her. Seraphie continued to explain the situation to the crown prince, clarifying that she was worried about them meeting alone. So she came to check and saw Mariette putting something in his cup. She added that she thought it was an aphrodisiac again. So in her anger, she switched the two cups to make Mariette feel ashamed. Then she revealed the shocking truth to him, that Mariette had put poison in his cup. Just as the crown prince was in a state of shock, one of his aides approached him. The aide informed the crown prince that the investigation revealed the same toxic compound from the teacup was also found on Mariette's dress, so the incident was ruled suicide. But the crown prince flatly rejected this conclusion, as he believed deep down that Mariette would never commit suicide. He was completely certain she had been murdered. In the present, Damien explained to Seraphie that, in fact, the investigation had not shown conclusive evidence that she was the one who had administered the poison. He added that, given the circumstances, accusing the daughter of the prominent Brinius family was a very difficult decision, even for the crown prince. Therefore, the conclusion reached was that Mariette had ended her own life. Seraphie commented that, despite this, the crown prince must have suspected her until the very end. Doubt filled her heart, and she wondered to herself if she had really killed her. She asked for Damien's opinion, and he replied that he didn't know the truth, but he didn't believe she was the murderer. When she asked why he believed so, he simply replied that it was just a feeling he had. Seraphie looked at him in surprise, as she hadn't expected anyone to trust her, and then thanked him for his words. Later, as Seraphie sat in a daze, her maid, Emily, noticed she was preoccupied. Seraphie, holding the pink hair, told her maid that she had no memory of it and was confused about who to ask. Emily, with a bright smile, offered to let her ask her. Seraphie asked her maid if she knew anything about the lock of pink hair. The maid suggested she think carefully, pointing out that there might be other people with the same hair color. An image of a young woman with pink hair flashed through Seraphie's mind, and she wondered if it was Rosaline. Seraphie recalled a previous memory when when Rosaline had whispered to her that the crown prince was secretly meeting his lover in his bedroom that night, urging her to go and find out the truth for herself. Seraphie initially rejected the idea, thinking it was impossible. Rosaline was curious about her excessive confidence. So Seraphie explained to her that the crown prince went to his office early, worked hard all day, and then underwent intense training, returning to his residence immediately after, insisting that he had no time to see women and that what she was saying was just a rumor. But Rosaline gripped her hand tightly, reminding her that the crown prince commanded the army, and wondered if it would be difficult for someone like him to move secretly and avoid people's eyes, speculating that perhaps he had been holding secret meetings within the palace all along. Rosaline's words left Seraphie shocked and anxious. Rosaline tried to calm her down, suggesting she go and see for herself. Seraphie completely rejected the idea. Rosaline was surprised by her refusal and asked for the reason. So Seraphie told her that the crown prince himself had told her he was not interested in women. Seraphie continued to defend the crown prince, insisting that he would not lie about such a thing and that if he were interested in someone, he would tell her frankly. Furthermore, he would not hold secret meetings within the palace. Given his personality, he would go out and enjoy his time outside. Rosaline appeared anxious, and Seraphie questioned if she had lied to her. Rosaline became confused, but Seraphie continued, saying that if that were the case, there was only one conclusion. Seraphie realized that someone was targeting the crown prince and trying to sneak into his bedroom, and she became determined that she must protect him. In the present, the maid told her mistress that she had tried to stop her that day, but she wouldn't listen, and in the end, she snuck into the crown prince's bedroom and claimed to have found the lock of hair there. The maid added that when Rosaline came to visit her the next day, she behaved strangely. She mentioned that when her mistress stepped out for a moment, Rosaline searched all over the room, guessing that she must have been looking for the lock of hair. Seraphie understood the matter, but she reassured her maid that there was no need to worry. Seraphie recalled an incident from a while ago when she entered the room to find Rosaline searching for something there. Rosaline frantically claimed she was looking for a dropped hairpin, but Seraphie told her it didn't seem to be there, so Rosaline added that it was one she had just bought. Seraphie asked about its design and offered to bring it to her if she found it, but Rosaline refused, telling her to keep it for herself, and then suddenly collapsed onto the bed. Seraphie asked with concern if she was all right, and Rosaline replied that it was nothing serious. Seraphie suggested she rest at home. Rosaline told her that she came because she was worried about her and wanted to know if she had been scolded for sneaking into the crown prince's bedroom. Seraphie reassured her that it was fine, that the crown prince was a little angry, but there was no problem. Rosaline apologized to Seraphie, claiming that the rumor was false, but Seraphie surprised Rosaline by saying that someone was indeed there at the time. Rosaline asked in surprise what she meant, so Seraphie told her that she saw someone escaping through the window. She whispered to her that she had found a lock of hair as evidence, and that she just needed to find out whose it was. Rosaline asked her the color of the hair, and Seraphie replied that it was red. Seraphie pretended to be confused, wondering who would do something so bold. Rosaline looked at her with disgust, thinking to herself what a fool she was. In another scene, Rosaline suggested to Seraphie that the lock of hair might belong to Mariette. She added that the hair color looked very similar, and that when she thought of red hair, the first person who came to mind was Mariette. So Seraphie nodded in agreement. Seraphie remembered that she had always thought Mariette was a good person. Rosaline took the opportunity to mention that Mariette had been interested in the crown prince for some time, which was very possible. Then the maid asked her mistress in surprise about Mariette, and she gave an affirmative answer. But the maid pointed out that the hair color was also the same as Rosaline's. Seraphie responded angrily, questioning the meaning of her words and insisting that Rosaline would not do such a thing and was just helping her out of kindness. The maid recoiled and answered her hesitantly. A few days later, the maid was at the market, and after buying what her mistress had requested, only the perfume was left to buy. The maid caught a glimpse of two people from a distance and recognized them as Rosaline and Mariette. The two ladies were whispering to each other and seemed to be careful not to be seen by anyone. Then they left. The maid hurried on her way to tell her mistress everything she had seen. When she arrived, she was in a state of shock, thinking that Rosaline had already gotten there before her. Seraphie was seeing off Rosaline, who was about to leave. Seraphie urged Rosaline to be careful, which caught the attention of the maid who was observing the situation. The maid called out to her mistress, saying she had something important to tell her. Seraphie asked her what it was. The maid told her that she had seen Rosaline and Mariette whispering together at the market, and that they were cautiously observing their surroundings. Seraphie replied that this was normal. The maid was surprised by her reaction, wondering if she knew beforehand. Seraphie explained to her that Mariette was the one who administered the aphrodisiac, and Rosaline was the one who asked her if she did it. She added that Mariette had a crush on Raven, that she planned to confess to him, and had requested a private meeting. The maid was shocked and wondered if this was true. Seraphie confirmed it, and therefore, Mariette was undoubtedly the culprit. The maid wondered if her mistress truly believed this, pointing out that there might be another possibility. But Seraphie firmly interrupted her, insisting they had no time to discuss this, that Mariette was trying to see the crown prince alone to confess to him, and that she was waiting for another opportunity to give him an aphrodisiac. She was determined that they must stop her before Raven became a victim of her scheme. Thus, the maid recalled how her mistress had misunderstood everything and headed to the meeting place. The maid recalled in her mind how the crown prince had furiously questioned Seraphie, accusing her of interfering and manipulating everything from behind scenes. Seraphie tried to defend herself, explaining that she had told him Mariette was the one who administered the poison and that she had only switched the 2 cups. But the crown prince refused to believe her, insisting that Mariette was not that kind of person. Seraphie questioned him with a rhetorical question, wondering if he thought she was the kind of person who would do such a thing. The crown prince, tired of the argument, yelled in her face, thinking that things were repeating themselves. The maid remembered her mistress returning after that and saying something strange. Seraphie entered the room, and the maid asked her what had happened and how it went. Seraphie told her that Raven believed she had killed Mariette. Despair took hold of her as she thought about being treated as a murderer. A wave of frustration and anger overcame her. The maid tried to comfort her, realizing she must be in great pain. Seraphie sat down, despairing why no one believed her. The maid asked her to tell her in detail what had happened. Seraphie explained that she had found Mariette putting an aphrodisiac in Raven's cup, so she switched the 2 cups. She only realized later that what she had put was not an aphrodisiac but poison, which shocked the maid. The maid concluded that it was logical that Mariette had tried to poison the crown prince, which meant she had no feelings for him. But Seraphie said that Mariette was not the culprit, which surprised the maid. The maid was surprised by her words and wondered what Mariette's motive for poisoning was. Seraphie insisted that she had seen with her own eyes Mariette putting something in the cup. She felt very confused. Seraphie repeated her assertion that Mariette was not the real culprit. In other words, Seraphie summarized the situation, explaining that Mariette wanted to see the crown prince to confess to him, while she, Seraphie, witnessed Mariette putting something in the cup and switched them, and the poison in the cup led to Mariette's death. Seraphie wondered why both the crown prince and Seraphie, who were present, asserted that Mariette was not the culprit, and the maid gave an affirmative answer. Confusion enveloped Seraphie as she wondered what had really happened that day. At another time, the maid were talking about the upcoming fireworks festival, with one asking another if she had a date and the other refusing to answer. Meanwhile, Seraphie came in and greeted them. So one of the maids asked her if the festival preparations were going well. As Seraphie walked away, she remembered the maid saying she saw Rosaline and Mariette whispering together. Seraphie decided she first needed to find out what Rosaline and Mariette had talked about. She decided to ask Rosaline directly, but the maid came back and told her that Rosaline had left early that morning. So Seraphie decided to go to the palace. Seraphie recalled the scene in her mind and decided to find out the truth no matter what. She knew she had to find Rosaline, but the maid told her that Rosaline had already left. With no other choice, she could only go to Crown Prince Raven, who might be able to help her solve this mystery, because she needed to ask Crown Prince Raven about what happened on that fateful day. Upon arriving, she confirmed that he had no appointments that day. She guessed he must be somewhere in the palace. She wandered through the spacious palace corridors, searching for him, only to be surprised to see him standing with Rosaline. The Crown Prince was thanking Rosaline for telling him something he had completely overlooked. Rosaline apologized, saying she just wanted to do her part as a way of thanks. The Crown Prince proposed that she be his dance partner on the day of the festival. Rosaline was both surprised and happy. The Crown Prince smiled and extended his hand to her, confirming his offer. Rosaline accepted the invitation with great pride. The Crown Prince told her that he would leave the preparations to her. Seraphie watched this scene from a distance, wondering in shock if the two of them had started dating. Rosaline noticed her presence and called her name in confusion. Rosaline anxiously wondered how long she had been standing there, because she didn't want to be seen in this situation. She explained that she had never imagined the Crown Prince would care for her so much, and that she was just trying to help Seraphie. Seraphie interrupted her, called her name, and said she had a question to ask. Seraphie approached her forcefully, which confused Rosaline, who felt the atmosphere was different from usual and that she might be slapped at any moment. Rosaline became furious, thinking that it wasn't her fault if the Crown Prince liked her. Meanwhile, Seraphie sharply asked her what she had talked about with Mariette that day. Rosaline was surprised by her question. Seraphie asked her to tell her in detail what had happened between them, but Rosaline hadn't expected this kind of reaction. Rosaline screamed internally that the Crown Prince had just asked her on a date and wondered how she could be so cold. So Seraphie, shocked, repeated her question. Rosaline claimed that she had already told her everything at the time, saying that Mariette had a crush on the Crown Prince and had asked her to arrange a meeting for them, and she had simply relayed the message. Seraphie asked if that was all and if there were any other details, no matter how small. Rosaline denied this, then changed the subject, wondering if that was all she could think about in this situation. Seraphie remembered the date and told her it was great that she was going on a date. She smiled and congratulated her, thinking to herself that this was perfect for her, as she could get rid of two annoying people at once. Seraphie told Rosaline she had one last question to ask, something important to her. Then she asked her directly if Mariette really had a crush on Crown Prince Raven. Rosaline was taken aback by the sudden question, while Seraphie watched her with a sharp gaze, making Rosaline wonder how much of the truth she actually knew. Elsewhere, as Damien was training, Seraphie suddenly interrupted him. She sat beside him and asked if he could tell her more details about the Crown Prince's meeting with Mariette. Damien told her he didn't know much, but Mariette herself had said she had no feelings for the Crown Prince. When Seraphie asked if he had asked her why she said that, he gave a negative answer. Seraphie explained to him that he and the Crown Prince had said the same thing that day. Seraphie concluded that Mariette did not love the Crown Prince, but at the same time, she was not the one who administered the poison. Confusion filled her heart as she wondered what had really happened that day and why both the original Seraphie and the Crown Prince had said that Mariette did not love him. She also wondered about the reason Mariette had put poison in the Crown Prince's cup. Most importantly, why they didn't believe she was the murderer. She felt very frustrated and wanted to go ask the Crown Prince herself. Just then, the Crown Prince suddenly appeared and asked what she was doing. He approached them and asked curiously what they were whispering about. Seraphie was surprised by his calmness, as she had expected him to distance himself from her after learning about her past from Rosaline. She hesitated to ask him, worried it would bring up old memories and anger him, thinking it was better to slip away quietly. To her surprise, Damien directly asked the Crown Prince about what happened on the day he had tea with Mariette. The Crown Prince told him that Seraphie was also present at the time, so she confirmed this. Damien intervened and explained to the Crown Prince that Seraphie had not yet fully recovered her memories after the explosion incident, and asked him to tell them what had happened. The Crown Prince began to narrate the events, explaining that Rosaline had come to him one day, asking him to meet Mariette, who wanted to see him privately. He added that he had refused at first, but she tried to persuade him with an interesting story, as she told him that seeing another woman might help keep him away from Seraphie. Rosaline continued, saying Seraphie's mentality was more fragile than tofu and that she wouldn't be able to handle it if he saw another woman, which surprised Seraphie. The Crown Prince commented that the idea was quite novel, a method he hadn't tried before. Seraphie realized that Rosaline's reason for telling her the meeting location was to defeat her mentally. She wondered if Rosaline was just pretending to be her friend to bully her. But Seraphie wondered why the Crown Prince, who had previously been silent about Rosaline, would suddenly tell her all this. The Crown Prince asked if she had learned a new truth, so she answered in confusion. He then surprised her with a direct question, wanting to know if she knew who had killed Mariette. Seraphie realized the situation was very bad, and a look of confusion and extreme anxiety appeared on her face. Fear took hold of her, as she had never expected the Crown Prince to ask her such a question, although she had anticipated something would happen. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince was thinking about what an evil and terrifying woman Rosaline was, and admitted that he might have been in such a state of shock at the time that he had completely forgotten about it. Then he spoke directly to Seraphie, asking if what he believed was true. Seraphie felt extremely anxious, as she realized she might have brought up his painful memories, so she tried to evade the answer, claiming that her memory of that period was not entirely clear. He responded to her words with a faint smile, then placed his hand in front of her, offering to help her retrieve those memories. He told her she would surely feel some pain, and at that moment, a scream erupted as she recalled painful past memories in the palace. Recalling the scene where the Crown Prince met Mariette in the garden, he had asked if she had something to tell him, and she had hesitantly given an affirmative answer. As he sipped his drink, he pondered the nature of this confession in his mind, not expecting that Mariette would directly express her love for him. She explained to him that she had been hiding this secret out of shyness, but now she had no choice but to confess her feelings. She went on to confide that she had fallen in love with an exceptionally beautiful person. That person was Lord Shahrazad. The Crown Prince, confused by this sudden confession, asked if she was referring to his relative, which she enthusiastically confirmed. The Crown Prince wondered why she didn't just go see him herself if she wanted to, pointing out that he was a friendly person and not difficult to approach. She replied that she knew, and that she had always been watching him from a distance. This caused the Crown Prince to become confused, not understanding why she would do that. She explained to him that her feelings for him were not just simple admiration, and that she did not desire physical or emotional closeness, as merely watching him made her happy, and the thought of him gave her the strength to go on living. She was willing to devote everything to him and expressed immense gratitude for being born into a world where he existed, calling her love for him an unconditional love. The Crown Prince looked at her in shock, wondering what was wrong with this strange woman. The Crown Prince asked her if what she was saying sounded strange to him, and she gave an affirmative answer. He tried to explain to her that this feeling of hers was not an ordinary emotion, but she asserted to him that it was fine even if he didn't reciprocate her feelings, because just looking at him made her happy. She added that the happiness of the one she loved was her happiness, and this was a belief she held deep in her heart. The Crown Prince couldn't help but let out a low laugh, so she asked if he was mocking her, and he assured her that he was taking this very seriously. The Crown Prince told her that this was the first time he had received such a sudden confession. Then he smiled and praised her, describing her as a pure and warm-hearted young lady. But he suddenly noticed she seemed distracted and asked if something was wrong, and at that moment, his expression turned grim. Mariette suddenly collapsed to the ground, unconscious, and the Crown Prince shouted for help, ordering a doctor to be summoned immediately. Seraphie concluded at that moment that the person Mariette loved was not the Crown Prince, but Shahrazad. And the reason why neither the Crown Prince nor the original Seraphie had mentioned this fact was another matter entirely. Seraphie thought that the reason they didn't reveal the truth was because Mariette herself had told them it was a secret. She was too shy to tell anyone. This explanation raised new questions in Seraphie's mind about Rosaline's role in the story, as she began to ponder the nature of the conversation between Rosaline and Mariette that ultimately led to Mariette being introduced to the Crown Prince. To Seraphie, it was illogical for Mariette to use the Crown Prince as a means to see Shahrazad. The other way around would have made more sense. Furthermore, Mariette didn't want to meet Shahrazad directly and talk to him, because her love wasn't that type. Seraphie felt that she didn't know if such an expression existed in this world, but Mariette saw Shahrazad as her idol or favorite character, a girl obsessed with him, as if he were everywhere yet nowhere to be found. Damien was in a state of confusion, wondering what had just happened, so the Crown Prince explained to him that he had shared the memory with Seraphie. At this, Damien wanted to know what role he played in all of this, while the Crown Prince just looked at him in silence. The Crown Prince asked Seraphie how she felt after learning the new truth, and Damien felt ignored. But Seraphie came to her senses and focused on the most important question, asserting that despite this, she still didn't know the identity of the poisoner. Seraphie suddenly felt a wave of panic, realizing she was talking about this in front of someone who was psychologically traumatized by an incident related to her, and she blamed herself for her words. The Crown Prince interrupted her thoughts, asking if she thought Mariette was lying, which surprised her. Seraphie wondered to herself what this calm secret was for someone who believed she was the culprit, as his behavior was surprisingly kind. She gave a negative answer, explaining that Mariette didn't seem like the type of person who would lie at all. The Crown Prince agreed, adding that among all the people involved, she seemed the most innocent. Seraphie felt a wave of relief, concluding that Mariette was not the murderer, and thought to herself that she had dodged an imminent death, thanking the heavens for it. But the Crown Prince warned her not to jump to conclusions, reminding her that anyone could be wearing a mask. She looked at him in confusion, wondering what he was trying to say. The Crown Prince asked if she was curious about the real culprit's identity, and she replied that of course she was, while silently praying in her heart that it wasn't her. She hesitantly asked if he knew who the culprit was, and the Crown Prince told her he already had someone in mind, but there were still some missing puzzle pieces. That didn't fit. Seraphie stood there, pondering the meaning of his words and those missing pieces. Later, Seraphie told her maid, Emily, that the person Mariette was infatuated with was Lord Shahrazad, which left Emily extremely surprised. Seraphie told her there was more to it, and Emily shouted that she knew it all along, reminding her mistress that she had said many times that Lady Rosaline seemed dangerous and blamed her mistress for not listening to her advice. She described Rosaline as a terrible person for deceiving a pure young lady and committing such a wicked act. Seraphie tried to calm her down, realizing she might have said something she shouldn't have, while an annoyed expression appeared on Emily's face. Seraphie asked Emily to help her change her clothes. Emily called out to her mistress, who was sitting on the bed, and asked her to get dressed. Suddenly, Emily's expression turned serious, and she told her mistress that today was a special day. Seraphie asked her in confusion what she meant by that day. Emily, extremely excited, told her that this was the day a man was inviting her out on a date for the first time. The guards, with serious expressions, lined up to greet and announce that Damien had arrived at the gate. His sudden arrival surprised Seraphie, who knew deep down that his visit was not for a romantic date, although her face was filled with confusion. But her maid, Emily, was extremely excited and insisted on her own interpretation, asserting that visiting a lady alone at this hour, with the festival approaching, could only mean a date invitation, and began to force Seraphie to change her clothes. Amid the latter's protests, Emily's face suddenly lit up, and she joyfully announced that Damien had arrived, while Seraphie was trying to break free from her grasp. Damien walked into the room with confident strides, but his expression was veiled with tension as the guards opened the door for him and formally announced his arrival. Emily pointed at Damien and whispered to her mistress, believing his obvious nervousness was conclusive proof for her date expectations, while Seraphie told her to calm down. Damien bowed very politely and began his conversation, admitting that while he realized his sudden visit might seem rude, he had to come and ask a question. Just as Emily was lost in her rosy fantasies about a festival invitation, Seraphie asked Damien what was on his mind. Damien made an unexpected request that took everyone by surprise, asking if Seraphie could let him see the Crown Prince's memory that she had seen earlier, shattering all romantic fantasies in an instant. Emily was heartbroken, her dreams of a date shattered, while Seraphie gave her a meaningful look as if to remind her that her suspicions from the start were correct. Damien explained in a sad and serious tone that the Crown Prince had not shared those memories with him, so he was forced to come to her to find out the truth. The memory returned to a previous scene with the Crown Prince, where Raven spoke of the missing puzzle pieces, pointing out that the truth would likely be revealed on the day of the festival. His remark about the festival surprised Damien and Seraphie, who were sitting beside him, but he confirmed it with confidence. Afterward, the Crown Prince coldly ended the meeting, telling them that was all he needed and giving them permission to leave and go home. At that time, Damien offered to escort Seraphie to her carriage, but the Crown Prince sharply interrupted him, asking dismissively if he had so much free time to do that sort of thing. Then, he reprimanded Seraphie with harsh words, blaming her for working here and not knowing her way around, which left her both surprised and confused. Seraphie tried to defend herself and explain her position, but he shouted in her face, refusing to hear any excuses, and ordered her to go to the carriage alone immediately. Seraphie was stunned by his reaction, while Damien bowed awkwardly and took his leave. The Crown Prince coldly turned and walked away, ignoring them. The effect on Damien was clear as he realized the Crown Prince was intentionally hiding those memories from him, perhaps trying to keep him away from something. Seraphie recalled the scene, pondering the reason for the scolding, and ultimately resigned herself to the conclusion that this was just his usual nature, nothing new. Returning to the present conversation, Damien explained to Seraphie that after that situation, he was ultimately unable to get any additional information from the Crown Prince, while Emily silently poured tea in the background. Damien expressed his concern, pointing out the Crown Prince's anger and unapproachable attitude at the time, which made him wonder about the nature of the memory Seraphie saw and whether it was something he wasn't supposed to know. Seraphie thought of the Crown Prince's terrible personality and gave a bitter smile, but she reassured Damien out loud that it wasn't what he thought. She revealed the truth to him, saying that Lady Mariette did indeed confess to the Crown Prince, but her confession was that she loved Lord Shahrazad and not the Crown Prince, asserting that this was the whole story. Damien fell into deep thought, processing the fact that Mariette's feelings were directed entirely at someone else, which changed the direction of the investigation. Seraphie commented that this was what made things even stranger. If she loved Shahrazad, she had no motive to use the Crown Prince or seek Rosaline's help to arrange a meeting with him. The question marks surrounding the case increased, and the relationships seemed convoluted and illogical. Mariette loving Shahrazad, Rosaline being the intermediary, and the mysterious attempt to use a stimulant or poison. All of it suddenly threw the three of them into complete confusion. Seraphie felt a sharp headache coming on, and she clutched her forehead in pain under Emily's worried gaze. A hand reached out to her, holding a pill, and Seraphie gratefully thanked the owner of the hand. It turned out to be Emily, who had prepared the medicine in advance and happily stated that she was prepared for this situation, although she sincerely hoped her mistress would always remain healthy. After taking the medicine, Seraphie was filled with gratitude for her maid, so she reached out and gently patted Emily's head, expressing her immense thanks for her help and admitting that while the order of things seemed a bit off, Emily's intervention was indeed a great help. Just as Emily was surprised by the sudden praise, she proposed a shocking hypothesis, wondering if Rosaline had lied and used Lady Mariette as a tool to assassinate the Crown Prince. But Seraphie, after analyzing the situation, quickly dismissed this possibility, pointing out that it was Rosaline who had told her the time of the meeting so she could go there and stop it, and if her true intention was to assassinate the Crown Prince, there would be no reason to give Seraphie that opportunity to intervene. Damien supported her analysis, asserting that if the goal was assassination, involving a third party in the plan would only lower the chances of success. Suddenly, Seraphie's eyes widened in shock, as if the puzzle pieces in her mind had finally clicked into place, and she posed a terrifying question. What if Rosaline's target was never the Crown Prince to begin with? Emily gasped in horror upon realizing her mistress's intention, while Damien added to the idea in a grim tone, deducing that the real target might have been Lady Mariette herself. Seraphie nodded in agreement, explaining that this explanation seemed very logical, because if Mariette had noticed Seraphie hiding there at the time, then after the incident, the Crown Prince's suspicion would naturally and immediately turn to Seraphie. Seraphie recalled Mariette's facial expression that day, and how shocked and confused she looked, which reinforced the hypothesis that she was the victim of a carefully orchestrated plot. Seraphie connected the dots, realizing that Rosaline had feelings for the Crown Prince, a strong motive that explained her desire to eliminate a rival, and concluded that, if Rosaline wanted to get rid of Mariette without getting her own hands dirty, she might have planned to use Seraphie as a tool to carry out the crime. Seraphie clearly realized the cruelty of this plan, as Rosaline had successfully killed two birds with one stone, both eliminating Mariette and making the Crown Prince hate Seraphie more than ever, leaving her stunned by the woman's cunning. Emily jumped up in a panic, insisting that this truth must be told to the Crown Prince immediately, warning her mistress that if she didn't, she would carry an unjust blame for the rest of her life. But Seraphie seemed dejected, telling Emily that for now, all of this was just imagination and inference, and even if it were true, proving it would require a confession from Rosaline, which was something she would never give easily. Damien agreed with her, pointing out that at this stage, it was likely that no physical evidence remained, and most importantly, he couldn't imagine Lady Rosaline confessing voluntarily. Seraphie curiously asked him why he was so sure and how he could judge that she wouldn't confess. Damien looked away melancholically and replied that it was just a gut feeling he had. A look of frustration appeared on Emily's face as she admitted that this possibility was unfortunately the closest to reality. Seraphie, recalling Rosaline's personality, also agreed with her, asserting that was indeed the impression the woman gave, which made the hope of getting her to confess very slim. Emily asked in a desperate tone if this really meant there was no way to prove her mistress's innocence. Seraphie sighed and replied that there probably wasn't a way, pointing out that it's impossible to force someone to speak the truth against their will. But suddenly, Seraphie stopped talking, as if a bolt of lightning had flashed through her mind as the words "speak the truth" left her lips. Emily eagerly asked if she had thought of something, while Damien turned to Seraphie and asked seriously if she had a way. Seraphie remembered the only person with the ability to conquer wills, realizing that only one person could force others to speak the truth, even against their will, and the image of Crown Prince Raven appeared in her imagination. The scene shifts to night, where a quiet palace corridor appears under the moonlight, and a mysterious figure wrapped in a cloak walks cautiously. The figure unveiled the covering on her head, revealing Rosaline's face, her expression a mix of anticipation and caution as she strode toward an unknown destination.